Hey, what's going on, Champagne Sharks? Yeah, so we're here, we're set up. Want to give you guys time to get in here, and yeah, it's gonna be a disinformation campaign, so get ready for it. We're gonna lie left and right. I have a nice new big screen TV that China got me, and I'm excited. And they told me all I had to do was this. I'm getting a new one every year, and they start me off with the 80-inch. And if I do a good job, I'm getting the 120-inch projector. So no one let me down. Okay, so we have with us. I'm gonna start with what I see in my screen. Um, let's start clockwise. So we have Teen Sheng. If you just want to tell people who you are and where to find you.
Sure, I'm Amanda's Yee's understudy. If she can't make it, her agent will send me. And I think last time I was on your pod, I think we might have talked about that movie Burning. You can find us at planamag.com, and the podcast is called Escape from Plan A.
Great. And next we have, and please pardon me if I butcher your name, Carl Jha.
Yeah. Hi, I'm the host of a Silk and Steel podcast, which primarily focus on China, everything China related, history, culture, and politics. And thank you for inviting me.
No problem. Glad you could make it. And we have Q Anthony, FKA Andre.
What's going on? How you doing? I'm pretty sure your audience knows me well, but yeah, contributing editor in Maclean's magazine. And based on the conversations I've been having this past week, who knows for how much longer? Because of course you can't have genocide deniers on staff, right?
yeah. You know, if you go to if you go on Twitter and search Andre Dominguez for people who don't, I mean, all three of these guys have been going back and forth with people, who are anti-Chinese and everything. But right now, I think Q is the biggest lightning rod right now. If you go to like twitter.com/Andre Dominguez, it's like I was saying before we started recording, I can't even parse the arguments on your page between the quote nested within quote tweets versus cross-posting versus subtweets, and I mean, like people coming at you like pretty fast and heavy right now. And how long has that been going on? Can you give us
a week. It's been a whole week. You know what it was?
Feels like yeah,
it does. I know. I mean, it feels like a year. But last week, Ilhan Omar tweeted out so that something. Oh my gosh, I should probably go look this up. But she tweeted out that there's atrocities happening in China right now, and that China is like persecuting Uyghur people. But then followed up with torture and rape and mass killings and so forth. And I said, "Oh, brother, here we go." That's it. That's all I said. And and then I said that because I rolled my eyes verbally and didn't follow up with like a list of atrocities that China is supposedly committing that have been reported in the New York Times and the Guardian or wherever, and have all been linked to Adrian Zenz. Because I haven't done that, I'm going to get pulled into the blender. And guess what happens? I got pulled into the fucking blender.
Yeah, it was a Vitamix too. It wasn't even one of those cheap Osters or something. No. You got really pulled into the blender. But you've been holding your own. I think that's what probably makes people even madder, because you've been holding your own. Because I think it's especially true when it comes to like Black intellectuals. They always kind of think you're just there to kind of talk about Black
race
stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I should be talking about Black stuff, talking about race,
but Black stuff. But because I mean, this is kind of about race too. But they think anything that's out of your direct supposed expertise, which is Blackness, you're gonna be caught with your pants down, and you'll just be talking nonsense. That's kind of what they expect. And
yeah,
I mean, the unearned smugness and confidence that I've seen people come at you with, like just like no citations, nothing, no knowledge. Just posting reading lists of things they clearly didn't read, and just being like smug, like
my absolute favorite are when people link me to journal articles.
Yeah,
because I've already like kind of gone through the news articles and pointed out the glaring errors and whatnot. So they'll like throw journal articles at me, And I'll be like, wait a
That they
second, I've already
didn't
read
read,
this.
I assume.
Yeah, I've already read this journal article, and it doesn't agree with what you're saying at all. And here are the points that I've already highlighted. They already exist in my little folder here. And here's the point that I've already highlighted, and here's why it doesn't agree with what you're saying. It's wild.
Well, they probably assume you can't read, and you got to be an editor from affirmative action, and you have like a program.
Yeah,
you have a program
no,
that
I
reads.
called illiterate a lot.
yeah. You're the illiterate editor. Yeah, a lot of leftists too. A lot of leftists will really show their ass about like how they think they got your job. When you don't agree with them on something, then they show their ass a lot. So
that I'm a token hire, that I'm a affirmative action hire. I've already heard all that shit from the right wingers, but when people start saying that, like, yeah, like obviously you're illiterate, or you're they'll just like go after my intellect and say that, like, obviously I don't have like the critical thinking skills or all that shit. Basically, just like search any sort of like intelligence insult under my name, and you'll see that I've been called them all. But a lot of it comes from the left, or rather, people who consider themselves to be on the left but are really just radical liberals.
It's kind of, as an Asian guy, it's kind of confusing watching it, because I'm like, are they calling you a black hotep or an Asian tanky? It's somewhere in between in this regard. I'm like, what exactly are they trying to say here?
I love that you say that, because I was just about to say that next, that the favorite way, I feel like I know it's leftists to use the N-word without saying the N-word is to say hotep,
Yeah.
They love saying
hotep is 0-calorie N-word is what that is.
Yeah, basically. Oh, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's how you say the N-word without actually saying the N-word.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to talk to you, Carl, because I know you've been going on this beat for a while, and I wanted to know what your take on the recent, between the right, the left, and the so-called liberal center, like what similarities or what differences you've been seeing and how they have been handling this. Because it's one of the few times where I really cannot tell the difference just based on a tweet, what anybody is. I have to go into the bio and look, because they kind of all look kind of the same to a certain degree.
Well, one common ground they all share is ignorance. I mean, most of them, the people who talking on Twitter, they neither know the language, they neither know Chinese or Uyghur. They probably never been traveled to China or Xinjiang, and they probably never heard of Xinjiang or Uyghur until 2018. And suddenly, they're all subject experts. They're giving their take on something they probably only read in the mainstream media in the last 2 years. And that's their basis for their talking points, and they don't even question what they read. I mean, that's what me, Andre, and Atin and the others have been doing. We're challenging the mainstream media narratives by providing, not even providing. We're actually just taking what they said and deconstructing it. And people are challenging us because we're doing that. They say, it's a genocide. How can you try to find faults with this narrative? And some people going even crazier. I saw a tweet yesterday or the day before. Somebody mentioned about Hong Kong genocide. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? I mean, these are the people who sit comfortably in the West. They have no knowledge other than what's been spoon-fed to them to the mainstream media, and suddenly these people have the strongest opinion on China. I was born in China. I grew up in China in 1980s, and for me, the more actually I learn about China, the land of my birth, I realize the more I don't know. But it's the most ignorant people. They have the strongest conviction for some reason.
And I'll open it to the floor, whoever wants to get it started, but can we get like a bare bones description of what the controversy is? Like the bare bones part that everybody can agree on, however small that is, about what is happening. And I don't know if I pronounced this right, because I've only ever seen it written, but I only heard it through Amanda Yee, but Uyghur, is that how you pronounce it?
Uyghur, yeah.
Okay. Uyghur. It's closer how you say like soy or like Uyghur, more closer. It's not exact, but Uyghur. Yeah, not Uyghur. How most Western media.
Here's the thing: is that what confuses people is that there tends to be two spellings. Is that they'll say Uyghur. I don't even think they do it based on the UY spelling, but on the UI spelling, because it was looking a lot different probably like 3-4 years ago than it does now. I find that people use the UY spelling now to arrive at Uyghur.
Yeah, yeah, I mean it's ridiculous. But what we do know is starting from 2018, there have been reports emerging from Washington-based NED-sponsored human rights organization, China Rights Defender, that they claim there might be upwards of hundreds of thousands of Uyghur in concentration camp. That was been widely reported in the mainstream media, and then that it was followed up by a fellow from Victim of Communism Foundation, Adrian Zenz, who provided kind of the scholar covering for this claim, and he also made the claim that it could be upwards to 800,000 or even 1 million Uyghur in concentration camp. And ever since that has been taken as gospel in the mainstream media. It was never questioned, and the rhetoric just got more shrill and shrill after that. So in the beginning, what they talk about is Uyghurs being rounded up in the concentration camp to subject to communist indoctrination. They have to sing communist songs. They have to pledge loyalty to the party, and now we're at the point now we're talking about China is actually committing genocide. And I think Mike Pompeo, before he got out of office, he pushed out this last designated what happened in Xinjiang as genocide, and Canadian Parliament just followed suit most recently that designated what happened in Xinjiang as genocide. So there's a lot of people online. They took that. They basically took the line of U.S. State Department and ran with it, but they didn't even realize that even the U.S. State Department recently had change of hearts, because just a week ago, U.S. Department there was a report from Inform Policy magazine. The U.S. Department lawyers said there's not enough evidence to call Xinjiang a genocide. I guess the people on the internet hasn't received the memo yet. So
Adrian Zenz had a change of heart too, didn't he, Carl? He said that he actually meant cultural genocide, meaning that their culture was being replaced with, the Han culture. And yes. He meant cultural genocide. I don't mean actual genocide. Even the source of all this seemed to have walked back the notion of what we mean by genocide in the.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because I bet 90% of the people on the internet sprouting the genocide narrative, I bet 90% of them never read Adrian Zen's report. They probably never read the China Human Rights Defenders reports on the Uyghur concentration camp when it first came out. I read both reports, and I found them both lacking, and that's what I have been tweeting about. I first read the China Human Rights Defender report when it came out in 2018. And it turns out their methodology was listed in the report. The question, according to them, supposedly the question 8 Uyghur witnesses from 8 separate villages in southern district of Kashgar. And then based on their testimony, they did the extrapolation. So they say, okay, this percentage of people from their village was supposedly being sent to re-education. So we extrapolated to the whole population of Xinjiang and the whole population of Uyghur there. So this is how we arrive at possibly hundreds of thousands or even up to a 1 million Uyghur figure. It's a whole extrapolation. Everything is there in the report, but when it gets quoted in the mainstream media, they just say, "Oh, we have credible evidence."
I think I hate to say this, but I think you're almost like underselling how bad this report is. Like this is like statistical malpractice. If I was to do a stats project like this and hand it in to an undergrad professor, I would fail immediately. It would have never passed muster. So like you're right in that the numbers were based on interviews with 8 people. That is absolutely true. It was 8 villagers. But here's what they did. They didn't go to, or at least it doesn't say in the report, they went to like administrators or like local bureaucrats or anybody who would know how many people are in the region and how many have been, if they've been put into detention, right? And then the second thing is that people fail to distinguish between what the CHRD calls a detention camp and what people call a vocational facility. So the detention camp is what I guess like that's what generated the most salacious headlines. And what they would do is they would go to, as you say, people in the Kashgar prefecture, like around southern Xinjiang, and they would ask them, hey, how many people in your village are not there? Like, how many are not accounted for? So a village of like 2,000 people, the person might say 400 people are missing from my village. So that's 20%. In a village of 3,000 people, somebody would say, oh, 500 people are missing. So that's 17%. This is one person per village for 8 different villages. All right. So your N is like so vanishingly small, it might as well be non-existent. And then they would take the 20% for, let's say, they said 400 people are missing. First of all, I don't even know 400 fucking people. Like, I don't know if 400 people would be able to say 400 people from my neighborhood are missing. Even if I was to go like back to my hometown of, or my family's hometown of Portland, Jamaica, where everybody knows everybody. And if a bunch of people were missing, I wouldn't be able to tell you 400 people from Portland, Jamaica are missing. I just don't know that many people, right? So they would say, okay, well, 20% are missing here, 17% are missing there, 13% are missing there, 10% are missing there. And then what they would do from that is draw out a statistical average of what they said was 12.8%. And then they extrapolated that 12.8% across the entire region and said, well, 12.8% would mean, I think they arrived at a what they called a conservative estimate of 10%, right, of all of these people in all these villages and in larger southern Xinjiang to come to a number of 660,000. And from there, it went from 660,000 to 1 million, from 1 million to 1.5 million, from 1.5 million to millions of Uyghur people, and then from millions of Uyghur people to 3 million. And that's where we're at right now. So this is all based on the testimony of 8 random individuals from 8 villages. That's what this is all based on.
Oh, I already seen people claiming 6 million. I mean, I seen people claiming the number of Uyghurs being rounded up has far exceeded the number of Jews being rounded up in Holocaust. I've seen that claim on Twitter already. I mean, it's yeah.
I mean, one thing you guys have to understand is that America's a country that doesn't really understand this stuff, because the idea of making people pledge any type of allegiance, America doesn't understand that. We didn't just have a whole NFL controversy over a year because people were rabid about somebody not, pledging a type of allegiance to the state, where someone got run out of their sport.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. We treat Muslims very well. We don't put them in camps. In Cuba, we don't do anything like that. So there's a lot of moral authority that people get carried away. And genocide, forget about that. You see Native Americans, indigenous everywhere. So this is very foreign to Americans.
Tia, I think what you're pointing out, that hypocrisy that you're pointing out, is actually what fuels it, right? Because I think a lot of times, like, this is almost like a grease fire, where if you try to fight it the traditional way with water, it actually gets worse. Because it's actually that hypocrisy that fuels this kind of thing. Because the whole point of it, in my opinion, is to sort of lower the bar for America, and to say that, hey, we're aware. I think people who allege this stuff and repeat it, they're fully aware, of what you're talking about. They're aware of the fact that, there's a lot of history to contend with when it comes to America, and that it's an uncomfortable history. But I think China, and the ability to project even worse crimes onto it, does 2 things. It kind of lowers the bar, and it sort of does this sort of universalization of atrocity, meaning, yeah, America did bad shit, But basically, if you think about it, all large, powerful countries have to do bad shit.
It's like a collective example of when you're talking with someone at an individual level and they act like they're being anti-racist, but they say, we're all racist, and it's like it's a way of pretending that they're fighting against racism, but they're really trying to dilute the idea of white supremacy.
Yeah, I think that's a large part of what's going on, and like Q, like just looking at some of the tweets, I would say that there's really, I mean, I think you're arguing with people on a factual basis. Like you're like a journalist, right? Like you actually want to get to the heart of what's actually going on. But I don't think and so in that sense, because you're truth oriented, these people that are alleging that you're a genocide denier are irrational. But to me, they seem rational, but they're just not in a truth mode, right? They're not in the domain of truth. They're thinking about politics, and I think the politics of it are actually very rational. Yeah, because for them, they're like, look, if I say that there's a genocide going on in Xinjiang, I don't have any evidence, and I think someone in the tweets actually said, you were saying, hey, what's the actual tribunal? If it's not the UNHCR, what is it? Right? If it's not the UN Human Rights Commission, what is it? And they said, well, at this point, I don't think there's a single body on the planet that could adjudicate whether this is going on. So he's basically saying there's no source of truth, right?
Yeah, I can't speak for Q, but I imagine what he's doing is for third parties and people reading on, because like I'm sure Q understands. I don't mean to talk about you like you're not here, but I'm sure Q understands he can't sway these people. But,
I mean, they talk about you like you're not here, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
I'm gonna do it anyway.
That's fine. Go ahead.
No, but I think you can't just let it stand. Whether it's the idea that he's stupid, doesn't know what he's talking about, even just to take care of that, or because it's been very informative to me, and plus it kind of betrays the irrationality you're talking about, like by seeing. Like speaking as an onlooker who knows nothing about this, when I see them keep showing their ass and he keeps making very reasonable things, and by refusing to get baited, I just think it makes them get angrier, because they want to make him triggered, and when he doesn't get triggered, then they just get more angry and irrational. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, but I just still think it's still important to respond to this stuff, even if it's not going to change any minds.
Well, people have been messaging me privately. Like a lot of people are not going to like get into the conversation and like duke it out with people. I don't expect that, because it's like I don't want anybody else, coming in on my behalf and getting brigaded and whatnot. But people have been messaging me privately and saying like, hey, I learned a lot about, the situation just from reading your tweets. And then now I've actually like gone and read through some of this stuff. So thank you for that. You pointed me in the right direction. And I'll say, okay, well, if there's anything else that you want to read, like I've got a bunch of sources, like, what do you want? And I have emailed a few people, some like journal articles, have emailed people, some like, the results of like my database searches. I even like have a book that somebody sent me, and I've now passed the book on to a couple of people to be like, hey, if you want to understand like the dynamics of ethnicity in China, like here's a pretty handy book for you to read. So I'm glad that people are like trying to get more information about this before fully coming to a conclusion. Like I don't hope to tell anyone, oh, there's nothing happening, because that's just not my impression. Like that's not my takeaway from the whole situation either. But I do want people to start questioning narratives that they're being fed, especially given that we've been fed so many narratives. And people say like we walk blindfolded into foreign policy adventurism or into war or whatever. And the thing is, like, we don't walk blindfolded. Our eyes are fully open. And I've even been saying something like we're getting sucked into the tailwind. And it's like, no, we're deliberately like on our own, of our own volition, like picking up our rucksack, putting it on, and just marching. Like that's what we do. We just go right on along with the dominant narrative, even though we know that there's not, like, we've been lied to so many times for the exact same reasons. And I think people are so desperate for a win. Like they're so desperate to feel that their goals line up with the goals of the state, and the state can actually do something on their behalf that they want to happen, that they're staking everything on this being true.
And I just want to put this on the screen where, I don't think any of us, I can't speak for everyone, but just from seeing how, reading you guys' timelines and everything. I don't think anybody, this is the first rodeo when they think that they operate in bad faith. But it's like if you just let something keep getting said unchallenged, it's just because that's a good
Then
thing
that
about
becomes
Twitter.
that's just the narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, so you just kind of have to do it, and it's not for the. I mean, there's a lot of anti-racism that's like that about trying to win the hearts and minds of the people who are bad mouthing you, and I don't think this is that, you know. But I mean, it is good to point that out, but I don't think anybody here in the panel is. And real quick, if you're at Twitter or Facebook or anything, feel free to share this on your Facebook wall, on Twitter, anywhere you can, because we want to get a lot of people in here and talk about this. Yeah, so email, tweet, share it with people, whatever. And I just basically want to set the basis for people who don't understand this controversy at all, which I think we've done. So I don't really want to do this so much like a official interview and panel, whatever. Feel free to make this a free flowing conversation, crosstalk, do whatever you want. I don't know much about this topic. I'm mostly gonna chime in if I think it's getting a little too inside baseball and I want somebody to kind of back up and explain something that regular people might not know. So yeah, I mean, feel free to have at it.
Well, I think it might be helpful if Tina or Carl, if you can sort of walk through the timeline, like how did we end up where we are right now? Because I think that's the context that a lot of people are missing.
Okay. Do you want me to walk through the timeline when it's getting reported in the mainstream media, or just go before, like what actually happening on the ground?
Yeah, the background, like the context to like what is it about, Uyghur people in particular?
Okay, so Xinjiang is a northwest region of China. It's a huge region. It's about the size of Alaska, but the area is. Even though the area is huge, but most of it is like mountains and deserts. The inhabitable areas are like these little oasis towns that's been fed by the glacial runoffs, and the people who live there, most of it's a very diverse region. I think officially there's like 20 or 30 some odd ethnicities living there, but the majority of the inhabitants is what we would call Uyghurs today. They are Turkic speaking, and majority of them are Muslims. So that kind of set them apart from the majority population in the rest of China. And this region was incorporated into China kind of on and off throughout time, because it sits on a very strategic location right on the Silk Road that connects China from like countries to its west. So traditionally that would be, Persia and Rome. So it's always a crossroad of culture. And, in the old times, depending on the Chinese dynasty's strength, when it waxes and wanes, it either incorporates the region or it loses. But around 1760, the last dynasty in China, the Qin dynasty, incorporated this region once again into its realm. And it stayed that way. It stayed that way until now. There have been some, there people talk about East Turkestan because there have been several attempts trying to establish independent a state in that region in 1930s and 1940s, but they're very brief attempts. It had to do with the politics of that time, because in the 1930s, the whole China was a giant battlefield. It's like, that's a warlord era China. It just imagine China as Afghanistan, right? Like China was divided up and ruled by different warlords. So there was a lot of misrule, and the locals rebelled against the Xinjiang warlord at that time. And very briefly in 1934 or 1933, for 6 months, there was an establishment of the first East Turkestan Islamic Republic in the area around Khotan and Kashgar. But that was quickly put down in few months by another by a Chinese another Chinese warlord army, but actually a Chinese Muslim warlord army. And then, like I said, Xinjiang itself is very diverse. It's not just a Uyghur, but there's also the Han population living there. There's also Mongols and Hui Muslim, who are Chinese-speaking Muslims. And in 1940, around 1944, Soviet Union sponsored another rebellion in the region because the Xinjiang warlord Sun Sicai was working closely with Soviet Union up to 1941, because in 1941, during the battle for Moscow, when the Nazi army was approaching Moscow, Sun Sicai, the Xinjiang warlord, he thought, that is it. Soviet Union is finished. This is also around the time when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. So he thought, okay, now Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, United States is going to enter war against Japan. And the leader of China, Chiang Kai-shek, he is very closely allied with United States. So it's better for me to ditch Soviet Union and go with Chiang Kai-shek. And then he rounded up all the communists that was working in Xinjiang, including Mao Zedong's brother, and he executed Mao's younger brother, and then went over to the side of Chiang Kai-shek. So in response, Soviet Union sponsored a rebellion in northern Xinjiang, and in 1944 they founded what's called the Second East Turkestan Republic in the northern 3 district of Xinjiang. But then there was a standoff, basically was a standoff, like a civil war in Xinjiang from 1944 to 1949, with the 3 northern districts sponsored by the Soviet against the Chiang Kai-shek's KMT-backed army in Xinjiang. But that was resolved in 1949 as the Chinese communists won victory in the Chinese Civil War. So at the time, the Uyghur communists already dominated the 3 northern district of Xinjiang. They agreed to work with the Chinese communists, merge their party, and the 100,000 KMT troops in Xinjiang, they realized, there's that Chiang Kai-shek is done for, so they decide to defect to the communists. So by 1949, that whole region become incorporated into the People's Republic of China. So this is kind of the brief history of Xinjiang, how it became part of PRC. And then in Xinjiang's throughout, starting from 1960s, China entered into the Cultural Revolution period. At this time, there were some very radical policies. Like all the religions were banned. Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, everything was banned. Mosques were closed, and the mullahs were sent to send for re-education. But that policy was reversed when Cultural Revolution ended in 1976. There was a reversal policy. People, then the mosque reopened, new mosques were being built, the mullahs were being allowed back into mosque. But around late 1970, another shift happened. Is Nixon visiting China in 1972, and then China essentially, because the Sino-Soviet split that happened earlier in 1960s, after the Nixon visit China basically aligned with United States against Soviet Union. And there was a war in Afghanistan. Soviet invasion of Afghanistan kicked off in 1979. That's around the same time China built a road from Xinjiang, its northwest region, into Pakistan. And through this road, because at the time CIA they didn't want to give the Afghan Mujahideens American weapons, which can be traced. So they actually purchased a lot of the Chinese-made weapons, which very similar. It's basically a clone of the Soviet weapon at the time, and to supply to the Afghan Mujahideens. And they also wanted to they also needed transportation. So at first they I don't know which senator's pet project is this. First, they supplied Afghan mujahideens with Tennessee mules, but the Tennessee mules couldn't hack it in the Afghan climate, so they died in mass. So they ended up buying a lot of mules and donkeys from Xinjiang, the Chinese region next door, and then they will ship these mules and donkeys through Pakistan, and then carry the Chinese weapons for the Afghan mujahideens into Afghanistan. So at the same time, China was
so Carl. So you're saying that China was actively working with the CIA during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan?
Yeah. CIA actually had a listening station in Xinjiang in 1980s to listen to to monitor Soviet nuclear tests in Kazakhstan in the Soviet Central Asia, and that listening station was operating all the way to 90s. I don't know if it's still. I'm pretty sure it's not there anymore. But the American embassy openly admitted to it, like around 1990s, the existence of the CIA listening station in Xinjiang. Around this time, China was also opening up post-Cultural Revolution, so the borders are open.
It's just I asked that because it's surprising because this is in the almost the immediate aftermath of the Vietnam War. So you're talking a pretty radical shifting of alliances, and China's now suddenly working with the CIA as opposed to, probably being.
Yeah, that's a whole 1972 Nixon visit to China about, right? Because Henry Kissinger wanted to play the China cards against Soviet Union. And also, prior to 1972, China was at odds with both Soviet Union and United States, and that position wasn't tenable. So Mao decided to go with the U.S. against the Soviets in 1972. But both China and the Soviet Union still supported the Vietnamese struggle against United States all the way till 1975 when the fall of Saigon happened. Late 1979, lot of things happened. That's why the China had a fight with Vietnam over Cambodia, and but for the particular region of Xinjiang, all of China now border was more widely open. People can travel abroad. So throughout during Cultural Revolution era, of course, China was closed off, right? So now some young Uyghurs from Xinjiang, now they travel on the Karakoram Highway to Pakistan to study, to work. But some of them ended up, further. They ended up near the border with Afghanistan. So that's where, CIA, Saudi Arabia, and government of Pakistan, they were funding the Afghan mujahideens. And Saudi Arabia actually funded a series of religious schools, madrasas, along the Pakistan-Afghan border, where the Afghan refugee children will be indoctrinated into the Saudi version of Islam, the Wahhabi Islam. And some of these Uyghur youth ended up in those madrasas, and some of them even went over to Afghanistan to fight against Soviet Union, to fight with the Afghan mujahideens in the 80s. And by 1990, so Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan happened around 1989, right? Like when at the end of Soviet Union, Gorbachev finally decided to withdraw, and then so by 1990, Afghanistan became just a battleground between different warlords. The Soviet is gone. Pretty soon, the Soviet-backed communist government will be overthrown. And 1990 is when some of these Uyghur mujahideen start to filter back into China. So I was born in China in 1976, and I came to the United States in October 1990. So just before I left China, there was an incident in Xinjiang. One of the first incidents that happened. It was in an area around Kashgar. This is what they call the Baden County incident in early 1990, a group of Uyghur Mujahideens who infiltrated back from Afghanistan, they decided to instigate the locals to take over, to storm the government institutions and the local police stations, and that was one of the first kind of serious incident that happened. And then what happened was these Uyghur Mujahideens will come back. This was a time when, so what happened in China was after 1949 establishment of People's Republic of China, they initiated land reforms in Xinjiang, just like they initiated land reform all across China. So the land were taken away from large landowner, including like monasteries, right? Like before, Buddhist temples and the mosques, they were among one of the largest land owning class. So the land were taken away from all these all the mosques, and then in 1976, after 1978, after the Cultural Revolution, when religion can be practiced openly again, when mosques are reopened, these mosques are now they're funded by the Chinese state because they don't have their land anymore, right? Their source of revenue and income. So the Chinese state was subsidizing all the Buddhist monasteries, all the mosques. And what these Uyghur Mujahideens coming back from Afghanistan were saying, it's like, they're not preaching the true Islam. All the mullahs in the mosque, they're state sanctioned, they work with a godless communist, right? So they're what they taught, what they're teaching you is not the true Islam. They're tainted. These mullahs are the communist stooge in our mosque. What we bring back from Afghanistan is a pure, true Islam that we got from our Arab brothers, straight from Saudi Arabia, and they started this organization to do underground proselytizing, right? They're telling people, don't go to the state-sponsored mosque. That's all bullshit. That's a corruption of Islam. We give you the true version, and initially they did that by providing social services because during 1980s, as the borders were opening up, a lot of things were going on. Just like in the post-Soviet, so just like in Soviet Union, former Soviet Union as well, people are experimenting, right? And like there was a lot of smuggling across the border, and there was a lot of drugs. Another consequence of Afghan war is, Afghanistan become one of the main producer of one of the base for producing opium, right? And the opium gets refined into heroin, and some of these drugs made their way into Xinjiang. So there was a lot of drug abuse. There was a lot of smuggling, alcoholism, and also prostitution because things were opening up. So all these Uyghur Mujahideens, first they started this underground organization. They preach, people don't drink, don't smoke, don't visit prostitutes. Don't use drugs. All these good things, right? You cannot argue with that. So they started gaining a lot of support on the grassroots level, and then once they gaining control of a village, then they start to implement a little bit more radical programs like women are not supposed to go out to work. They need to wear like full face veil burqas, and then they start to tell people you cannot. You cannot affiliate yourself with the Chinese state because it's a communist-led government. It's godless. So that means when you get married, don't go to the state government to register your marriage.
Carl, let me ask you a question. Around this time, right? So where we were kind of in the 90s at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, there was some American coverage of this, right? But it seemed to be of a very different sort, from what I understand. That the U.S. didn't quite have the same like sort of liberal concern about religious rights and the rights of Muslims, which I think is something that seems to be a more modern sort of like
recent. Yes.
Yeah. It was a little bit different then, right? Meaning I've seen headlines that were like, oh, there's sort of like the sort of like medieval type Islamic terrorism is visiting the Chinese, and Americans know what that's all about, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I get my source. People ask me what my source. I do what Andre do actually. I take all these anti-China critics, all these xenophobes. I take their source and I cross-reference them. So one of the supposedly top American Xinjiang expert scholar is James Millward, right? He's also on this bandwagon of Uyghur genocide. And so I go up to, I look at his statement from earlier, from 1990s, from 2000. You can actually find on YouTube. So James Millward actually went to study in Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang, in the early 90s. And what he said was, back then, when he was in Xinjiang in early 90s, the ethnic relationship between the Han, and which is a majority of the Chinese population, and the local Uyghur is amicable. You can see that. You can find that YouTube on YouTube. You know, where he said back in late 80s, early 90s, the relationship between Han and Uyghur is amicable, and that's kind of the same impression I had growing up in China in 1980s. You know, the way the Chinese state kind of promoted the Uyghur culture is that these people, they love to sing and dance. You know, on the state TV, we just see a lot of Uyghur people singing and dancing, right? That's kind of the different type of stereotype that the Han people have about the Uyghur people. And then something happened in 1990s. This is the part that Professor James Millward never really adequately explained. Right, the popular explanation among the Western media is, oh, there's a huge influx of Han immigrants into Xinjiang that's threatening both the livelihood and the culture and the cultural continuity of the Uyghur people. But if you actually look at statistics, that doesn't really fly, because their common reframe is that Xinjiang in 1949, at the time of establishment of People's Republic, there was only about 6%, 6 to 9% Han population, whereas by now it's about somewhere between 36 to 40% of Han in Xinjiang, right? So they say, oh, this outgrowth of Han population in Xinjiang, that's what led to the increase in ethnic tension, which sounds like a very simple explanation, but that actually doesn't stand under scrutiny, because the huge Han migration happened to Xinjiang actually happened in 1960s. That's when Mao told send all the educated youth to the countryside, to the borderland. So there was about 1 million youth, so-called educated youth, that were sent to Xinjiang. And also in 1960 was, as consequences, a great leap forward. There was a great famine in China. A lot of the famine refugees from the province next door to Xinjiang, from Gansu and Henan, they went to Xinjiang because Xinjiang was the least affected region in China by the famine. Over 1 million famine refugees also went to Xinjiang. So the Han population was already at 40% of the Xinjiang total by 1978, end of the Cultural Revolution. And James Millward, the American professor, went to Xinjiang in late 80s, early 90s. And at that time, the composition of the Han Uyghur demographic is about the same. It's about 40% Han, 46, 48% Uyghur, with some other ethnicity making up the rest. But he said, by living there, that ethnic relationship between Han and Uyghur is amicable. And if you look at the demographic makeup of Xinjiang, it hasn't changed much since 1960s. It's still around 40% to 48, 49%. In fact, the Han population dropped in the most recent years because of the terrorism that's plaguing the place. So now it's about like 36%. We're gonna have another the 2020 census is gonna come out later this year, so we will know for sure the exact figures. But what happened in Xinjiang then is that at the time China was concentrated on, so before end of Cultural Revolution, China was more kind of ideologically focused, right? Because Mao really cared about class struggle. So after end of Cultural Revolution, during then era, China is more concentrated on economic development, and what ended up happening is that there was a sort of ideological vacuum in China, right? That kind of led with flourishing. People kind of rediscovering their religion, right? There's a lot of people. There was a flourishing of Buddhism, Islam, Christianity all over China in 1980s. So there's like a natural interest in Xinjiang for people to discover their Islamic roots, to learn about more Islam. And these Uyghur Mujahideen coming from Afghanistan, they kind of fill the niche, right? They sell themselves as bringer of the true Islam. In fact, they're just bringer of the Saudi Wahhabi brand of Islam. But so terrorist incidents start to grow throughout 1990s. There was a big incident in Yilin, the city of Yilin near the Kazakh border in 1997, and there were a series of bombing in Urumqi buses. But these are kind of still isolated incidents, kind of spaced out. But by 2009, I say that's really the watershed moment. So at this point, by 2000, the Chinese government realized there's a problem in Xinjiang. There's a problem with terrorism. And for the Chinese government perspective, because Chinese government is a communist government, and from their Marxist perspective, everything is economically based. So they thought they think the soil of terrorism is poverty. So if they can eradicate poverty in Xinjiang, they can get rid of the problem. So they concentrated on the economic development. And they did that two ways. One is increasing infrastructure development in Xinjiang, build more roads, build more railroads, build railroads to Kashgar. And at the other end is they try to get the Uyghurs to work in the factories, because in Xinjiang, 80% of the Uyghurs still engage in subsistence agriculture. And as I mentioned earlier, Xinjiang, a lot of land, inhabitable land in Xinjiang are these small oasis areas in the desert that's been fed by the glacial runoffs. And the Xinjiang population has quadrupled since 1949. Like there are about 3.5 million Uyghur in 1949. And now there's about 12 million, right? 11 to 12 million. So the Uyghur population quadrupled, but most of the Uyghur people still live on the farms in the traditional oasis, these oasis towns where the main trade is agriculture. And so there's a lot of youth unemployment problems. So the Chinese government thought they could address the unemployment problem by moving Uyghurs to factories. There weren't enough factories in Xinjiang for export-oriented industries, because after fall of Soviet Union, the whole Central Asia got cratered. So, but most of the Chinese export-oriented factories are on the coast, on the Chinese coast, on the east. In places like Guangdong. Right, so they had a program. The Chinese government had a program in early 2000s to organize Uyghur laborers, young men and women, to go to factories in Guangdong. They would give tax incentives to factory owners for them to employ Uyghur labor, and if you go look up Radio Free Asia, which is a offshoot of the CIA media, you will see a lot of opposition, a lot of criticism of the Chinese government policy from that time. One of the main criticism is that, China is taking young women from all these conservative Uyghur families to inland, to far off Chinese cities. There was worry that these young Uyghur girls will be corrupted. They might even have sex and might even meet Han Chinese and get married and never return to Xinjiang. So there was already a concern among more rural conservative Uyghur society, that's getting amplified by propaganda from Radio Free Asia. So back in 2008-09, all the American social media were available in China. Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, right? And a lot of the Uyghur exile group, they use these social media tools to influence influence events back in Xinjiang. So around 2009, this was also the time of the Great Recession, right? There was a great financial crisis. So so all the Chinese export industry got hit very bad. But at the time, Chinese government was still bringing Uyghur labor from Xinjiang to the coast, and which caused a lot of disgruntlement among the local Han Chinese workers. So in 2009, there was a Shaoguang incident in Guangdong. There was I saw this happen in real time online because I was logging into a Chinese forum, and somebody posted something saying a Han Chinese girl was gang raped in the dormitory of the Uyghur workers. The claim was that she went to the dormitory because in the Chinese factories, they have these dormitories for workers, and it's really sex segregated. There was a male dormitory and a female dormitory. They claim that a Han Chinese girl went to the dormitory to look for her boyfriend, but accidentally stumbled into the Uyghur side of the dormitory. And then the claim is that she was gang raped, and then the authority is trying to hush up, is trying to cover up because they don't want the government policy of moving Uyghur workers to be criticized. And that post soon went viral. And next thing you know, there was a mob gathered outside the Uyghur dormitory. And then this vigilantes then attacked the Uyghur workers. So in the ensuing fight, 2 young Uyghur men were killed, right? So this was a Shaoguang incident in early 2009. And then a lot of the Uyghur exile organization in United States, in Germany, they started to, through Facebook, through Twitter, they started to exaggerate. And what they were saying is young Uyghur girls, these young Uyghur women who were brought to work in those factories in inland coast, they were attacked and gang raped, and terrible things were happening. So there was by June 5th, 2009, in Urumqi, there was a large crowd gathering outside the Urumqi government building in capital of Xinjiang to demand the Chinese government to prosecute the perpetrators. So this happened just like the timeline was very close. Chinese government actually did prosecute the perpetrator. They arrested this online original poster online. So the stories they released was this guy was a laid off worker because he was disgruntled because he was laid off. That's why he made up this rumor, to incite the mob. And what actually happened, according to at the time the Uyghur chairman of the Xinjiang Autonomous Region, according to him, what happened was this Han Chinese girl went to the wrong dormitory, and what he said is the young Uyghur man teased her. I don't know how you can interpret teasing, but anyway, she screamed. She wasn't gang raped. She screamed. She ran outside, but her scream was heard by a lot of people. And then they just, when the internet rumor mill started, they made it into she was gang raped, and that's how the whole mob gathered. And Chinese government actually arrested the poster. They actually also arrested several people who were involved in who were the leaders of organizing the mobs. But by June 5th in Urumqi, so there's another large crowd gathering in front of the provincial government. But they were headed off by the riot police, so they couldn't approach the government building. And then what happened is they turned around, they went back inside the surrounding neighborhood, and they starting to to beat up any Han Chinese they could find. And this was the evening rush hour. Like a lot of the office workers were getting off work to go home. They take their bus, and the bus route go through that area. The Uyghur go through the Uyghur neighborhood. So people were the bus were being stopped. People were being pulled off the bus and then beaten. And this went on for a whole day and a whole night. I think the Chinese government was totally unprepared for what happened. And in the aftermath, I think there's 197 people killed, and most of them are Han Chinese. And at the time, there was a lot of misinformation about what happened. So I went online. I tried to find information of expats, of Western expats who live in Urumqi about what actually happened. So I found the blog of this Chinese American guy. He's actually half because his mother is white. So he, because his mixed parentage, he looked Central Asian. Right, he looked Central Asian. So he was out on the night of June 5th, and you know he was confronted by the young Uyghur mobs out looking for Han Chinese people, and he was in Urumqi for a couple of years studying the local language at the Urumqi University. So he speaks some passable Uyghur, but he still have accent. So he said, "Well, I'm." So people were they're being stopped, they're being questioning Uyghur. So he said, responding in Uyghur, that he said, "I'm a Uzbek. I'm an overseas Uzbek coming back. I don't know what's going on." So the people let him go. And as the people were leaving, there was a young Uyghur man who very helpfully told him, so like, don't tell people you're Uzbek either, man. We don't like Uzbek either. So he survived. He survived that night. And this was kind of the June 5th Urumqi riot was kind of the watershed moment in the Xinjiang ethnic relations, and also, how the situation was dealt by the Chinese state. So the crackdown started after 2009. Before 2009, there was a lot of the rural Uyghur, especially young Uyghur from southern Xinjiang. So Xinjiang is a huge area, divided by Tianshan Mountain into north and south. Most of the Uyghur population live in the South Xinjiang. That's like the Uyghur homeland. Whereas the north used to be populated by nomads and Mongols. And that's but the Mongols were they suffered a real genocide back in 1760 by the Manchu government. So that whole area got depopulated. That's how the Han Chinese started to moving into that area. So in northern Xinjiang, it's there's a Han majority. So Urumqi, the capital, is like 75% Han Chinese, 25% Uyghur. But because of northern Xinjiang was more developed, in terms of industry and everything. So a lot of the southern, the Uyghur youth from the rural southern Xinjiang, they moved to North Xinjiang for work, and many of them went to Urumqi. And there was a Uyghur shanty town just outside of the city in the mountains around Urumqi. So after 2009, the city government decided to dismantle the shanty town area. Making everybody go home back to the southern Xinjiang. There was a whole series of crackdown, and then fast forward a couple of years later, they also started to lock down the borders of Xinjiang with all the Central Asian neighbors. And 2009, we're getting closer to our present timeline. So by 2012. There was a Syrian war broke out, right? Syrian war broke out, and then so the Turkish state, being part of NATO, work with the NATO and United States. We're funneling all the jihadists from all over the world to Syria to fight, fight against Assad's government. And then there was also a pipeline from China, because what happened is, the Turkish state, they work out a deal with the government of Malaysia. So the Turkish consulate in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, will give out Turkish passport to any Uyghurs who come asking. All they have to do is to make their way to Kuala Lumpur. And so a lot of these Uyghurs in the rural villages who already got influenced by these radical, who already got radicalized, they started to flee from Xinjiang, but they couldn't go through Central Asia because the borders were locked. But internally within China, the travel is still free. You can just jump on the high-speed train, and a few hours later, you're in other parts of China. And in southwestern part of China,
Wait, Carl, sorry, to question. So you're saying these are young people that you
give me 1 second. I have sorry, my wife's package is coming in. Let me just grab it real quick. So sorry. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Just left us hanging in the middle of a really good story.
Back.
Oh, there you go.
I'm back.
No, so you're saying that these youths were being radicalized by underground Wahhabist networks in Xinjiang itself?
Yeah.
And then they were being recruited through those networks and knew to travel to KL, and that they would get a passport there to go.
Yeah. Well, so CIA, they don't have direct influence in Xinjiang. They have very little influence in Xinjiang. But these in Xinjiang, the radicalization are kind of the blowback from Afghanistan war. A lot of the Afghan mujahideen were doing all these underground proselytizing. I mean, the reason why they gained so much popularity is because Xinjiang also underthrew a lot of changes. That's why, like Professor James Millward were never able to explain. It's because this is a time when China started to privatize its economy, right? So before 1990, China was still mostly a socialized economy. Everybody get work, right? Like so it doesn't really matter. The state provide kind of the cradle to grave welfare system. And that's another reason there's no direct competition between the Han Chinese and the Uyghur for job. Right, everybody gets state jobs somehow, but in 1990, what happened was in 1980 and 1990 is when China started to liberalize the economy. A lot of the state-owned enterprise are getting sold off and privatized. And in the private economy, if you're a person from Xinjiang, if you speak Mandarin Chinese, you are going to have a leg up over people who only speak Uyghur, right? And because Xinjiang, after founding of People's Republic in 1949, Xinjiang, because it's a Uyghur autonomous region, and by Chinese constitution, the ethnic minorities are entitled to be educated in their own language. So the Uyghur people, they go through back before 2000. They go their educations. There are two tracks schools in Xinjiang. You can either go to the Mandarin educated schools where education is conducted in Mandarin language, or you can go to the all Uyghur schools where everything is Uyghur. So you can go through kindergarten to college only to be educated only in Uyghur, which was fine in 1980s when the socialist state was providing all the jobs. But by 1990, when Chinese economy got liberalized, if you only speak Uyghur and don't speak Mandarin Chinese, you're not going to have much job prospect in China, especially with a lot of the manufacturing was done in China along the East Coast, right? People who have the family connections or whatever connection to the East, they can go directly and get the goods to Xinjiang. And what happened in 1990 is the kind of economic disparity between the Han Chinese and the Uyghur become apparent, starting from 1990, 2000, and up to now. And so there's so that's another kind of the social economic reasons for some of the discontent that was building up in Xinjiang that was being exploited by all these Uyghur Mujahideen groups. And sorry, did I answer your question, Team?
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I think you were sorry. I because you were on this this topic about the Syrian war.
Yeah. So Syrian war happened, and a lot of the Uyghur families starting to hop on the train that go to. Sorry, that's my dogs. they can't the exit through Xinjiang to Central Asia is blocked. So what they would do, they jump on the train, they go to Yunnan, southwest China. And for people who visited Yunnan, they would know the border is very lightly guarded. I mean, I went to Yunnan in 2019, just 2 years ago. Like local just walk across the border, you know, it's like nothing. And so a lot of the Uyghurs will go take the train to Yunnan, and then they will sneak across the border to Myanmar, to Laos, to Vietnam, make their way through Cambodia to Thailand, and from Thailand down to Malaysia, where they would receive the Turkish passport. And with the Turkish passport, they can fly to Turkey. And as soon as they get off the airport at Istanbul, the Turkish passport getting taken away. And then they're greeted by jihadi recruiters who get them to Syria. I mean, this last part is actually reported by Reuters. This is not even like, I'm not even giving away like hack material here. Everything is publicly available. There was actually a Reuters article by, not Reuters, AP, Associated Press, by Jerry Shi. He reported about this kind of the pipeline to Syria. And that's why if you go to the timeline around 2014, 2015, you can Google a lot of issues about Uyghur refugees from Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand. There was a diplomatic fight between the government of the United States and China, because a lot of these Uyghurs are being caught in borders of Vietnam, in Cambodia, and in Thailand. And Chinese government want them to be repatriated, but the U.S. government and the Turkish government is like, no, let them go to Turkey. Hey. Oh, I have another package. What the hell? Jesus. So many packages.
Don't open that package, Carl. It's a trick.
I'm so sorry. My wife have so many packages come in today. I didn't
Your dog
realize.
is xenophobic, bro.
And my dogs are very good at letting me know. I just broke my earpiece, so let me unplug this. Okay,
no problem.
Sorry about that. So where I was talking about Syria. Yeah. So if you go to the timeline of around 2014, 2015, if you Google about Uyghur refugees, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, you will find a lot of those. There was an incident where a group of Uyghur who tried to cross the China-Vietnam border, they got stopped by the Vietnamese border guard, and one guy actually grabbed the AK off the Vietnamese border guard and started spraying bullets. And you know, you can also find that article. You can just Google it. You know, like clash at the China-Vietnam border and keyword Uyghur, and so United States government wanted these Uyghurs to go to Turkey. Right, so Cambodia complied with China because Cambodia has closer tie with China. So was Vietnam and Laos, but Thailand is got caught in between because Thailand has a very close military tie with United States, but Thailand also enjoy friendly tie with China. So in the end, Thailand did the Solomon's justice. They say, okay, so women and children gets to go to Turkey. All the men gets repatriated to China. And that actually sparked off a huge anti-Chinese protest in Turkey. This was in 2015. A South Korean tourist was attacked because the Turkish protester thought she was Chinese. And when the Turkish ultra nationalist party MHP leader was questioned because their party organized a protest, he actually said, "Well, it's not our fault they all have slanty eyes." Right. I mean, you can find that too.
Wow.
Wouldn't it be in China's interest to actually have these sort of like extreme, you know, these young people just like, okay, well, if you've been radicalized and you want to leave China, wouldn't they support them leaving China?
Well, that's basically the Putin's method, right? And that's also the Western method. You know, a lot of the lot of the radicalized youth from England, from Belgium, they were let go to Syria. A lot of the Western intelligence agencies, they're fully aware of these people. They just turn a blind eye. But for whatever reason, China decided, no, we want all these people back, because some of them are wanted for their roles in 2009 Urumqi riots, right? And because Urumqi riots, it was from what I read, a lot of people from different people, not just Chinese government, they think the Urumqi riot is to a certain extent then organized. And by the way, Urumqi riots, that's when Facebook got blocked. So before 2009, you can access Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, but because a lot of the Uyghur exile group were flooding these.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because a lot of Uyghur exile groups were flooding these social medias with anti-Chinese incitement. So that's when Chinese government blocked off Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. This is in the aftermath of 2009 Urumqi riot. And so after that, I'm going off all tangent here. Sorry. So 2015. Because of the Thai government decision, there was a bombing in Bangkok. 2015 Bangkok bombing. You can look that up too. So they targeted a Buddhist shrine, which is visited mostly by Chinese tourists. And when they caught the perpetrator, they found the perpetrator with Turkish passport. But he claims to be Turkish. But then the Chinese government produced documentation saying no, he's actually a Uyghur. And when they raided the perpetrator's apartment, they found a whole stash of Turkish passport, quote unquote fake Turkish passport. You can look that up too. Just look up 2015 Bangkok bombing. So a group of Uyghurs were caught and charged for the Bangkok bombing. They were on Turkey, and even some Uyghur made it way to Indonesia, where I live now. They went to join some Mujahideen groups in Indonesia, and when they were caught, they were also have Turkish passport. They claimed they were Turkish, but it turns out they were actually Uyghurs. So there was a whole pipeline of these Uyghurs going to all these nefarious intelligence agencies, basically shipping all these Uyghurs, making sure they end up in Syria. So in fact, in 2015, so before the Uyghur Mujahideen group was called the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, and it was actually put on the terrorist list by the United States government around 2001. So they rebranded themselves Turkestan Islamic Party, and they're a Al-Qaeda affiliate. The Turkestan Islamic Party's leader, Abdul Haq, he is on the High Shura Council of Al-Qaeda. So he's part of Al-Qaeda. So Turkestan Islamic Party, they had thousands of Uyghur fighters in northwest Syria. And they were the spearhead of the Al-Qaeda takeover of the Idlib province in 2015. When the Al-Qaeda offensive to take Idlib happened, the Turkestan Islamic Party sent 5 Uyghur suicide bombers to blow up the Syrian army defenses. 5 truck bombs like in a row. And they were known. These Uyghur fighters were known as one of the toughest. They're closely aligned with Al Qaeda in Syria, are now rebranded as HTS. And there are various estimates. There are estimates about anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 Uyghur fighters in northwest Syria, and some of them estimate even up toward to 20,000, including their families and children, because the Turkestan Islamic Party actually produced a lot of videos of their little kids, of these little Uyghur kids being indoctrinated in these camps. So this is a kind of, I took a long way, but this is kind of the background history. And around 2014, China started crack down on its border, it's a southern border as well. So there was a group of Uyghurs who hoped to exit China to go to Syria. They got blocked. and then they decided to carry out jihad locally. And in 2014, March 1st, 2014, this was a Kunming train station attack. So 8 Uyghurs armed with knives, they went to the Kunming train station, which is super crowded, and started to stabbing people. 30 people died. 30 people died from stabbing, hundreds injured. And this was a big shock, because this, before the attacks were mostly happening in Xinjiang. This now, like, it happens outside of Xinjiang, in a populous Chinese city. And also 2014, there was another attack in Tiananmen Square. A Uyghur, radicalized Uyghur, they drove a van into Tiananmen Square, and they start to run down the pedestrians, and then they light the van on fire, trying to blow it up. So this, you can also Google this all this information is freely available. And the Turkestan Islamic Party claimed responsibility for both attacks. And in 2014, Xi Jinping went to Xinjiang to inspect the region, and to coincide with his visit, the Turkestan Islamic Party, they did a bombing at the Urumqi train station. When all the people are gathering. So this is the background. I'm trying to give you the full background of the history. And then by 2017, that's when the Chinese government started to initiate a even further crackdown, which is they decided they need to de-radicalize the people who have been brainwashed by the extremist ideologies. Now, I don't completely agree with the Chinese government method, right? And I think it's very possible in their dragnet, probably there might be many people who got caught up by the strict crackdown, and there's probably abuses, right? Any kind of a system-wide detention, there's probably abuses. But now this is being spinned off as the Chinese concentration camp and the genocide. So the Chinese government called them vocational training centers. It's the people who haven't committed major crimes, but the people who maybe have minor offenses, and the people they deem that have been radicalized. So in the de-radicalization centers, they're basically taught Chinese language, Chinese laws, and they are also being trained for vocational skills for when they get out, so they can work in factories. Have
you looked at Emmanuel Macron in the government of France announced what at the surface seems broadly similar, a sort of de-radicalization program of education, and I think there was some liberal criticism of it to say, is this Islamophobic, and there was some discussion about it, but it never got to that level. I don't know if you think those are similar things.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, there's similar program even in Central Asia, in neighboring country of China, in Tajikistan. Tajikistan have the similar de-radicalization program as China, because Central Asia also have a problem of some of their population going off to Syria to fight. And again, I have reservations about Chinese government and method, but then again, it's not genocide. And also, let's compare with the de-radicalization effort of the Western governments. What they do, all these MI6 and all these intelligence agencies, they're fully aware of all these extremists in their society, but they willingly let them buy plane tickets to fly to Turkey, to go to Syria to fight for ISIS, right? And now there's, in fact, right now there's 60,000 ISIS families being holed up in this camp in northeast Syria called Al-Hol camp, AHOL, a whole camp in northeast Syria. These are not even ISIS fighters; they're ISIS wives and their children. They have been held because many of these people held nationalities in Western Europe, in Western countries, but Western countries don't want them back, right? So instead, these people are being left to rot in northeast Syria, where like now they're having COVID problems. In fact, Australia and New Zealand just had a fight recently because this person who held dual citizenship of New Zealand and Australia went to fight for ISIS, and Australia just revoked the person's citizenship. Right. So now basically kicking the back to New Zealand because they don't want these people to come back. They don't want these people to come back to their own country. They want these people to stay over in Middle East to plague the people, to plague they basically made life hell for people of Iraq and Syria. And now they're, shifting their burden to them. And that is the extent of the Western de-radicalization program, right? I mean, so this is kind of the background. I went I don't know how long I went. I went a huge tangent, but I hope I provided enough context for this conversation.
Oh, more than, first off, okay, I'm actually unmuted this time. I kept making that mistake. No, you provided more than enough context, but okay, you seem to know this stuff inside out, and you seem to have a lot of experience with this topic and everything. But counterpoint, Adrian Zenz is white, so I feel like
I'm a genocide denier. Yes.
yeah. I mean, it seems this is what's funny about being Chinese and talking about this is if you're Chinese and you talk about this, against the talking points, you can't be trusted because you're Chinese and biased. But if you're Chinese and you're saying what the genocide accusers want to hear, suddenly the fact that you're Chinese suddenly matters and gives you extra weight. So it's kind of like a no-win situation. It's like I feel like the only thing that a lot of these people will listen to is if it's a white guy, but he's doing the so-called genocide denying, because I've seen it happen both ways. It happened in Q's replies where that woman was sending all this, that leftist woman was sending, she seemed more like a lib who convinced herself she was leftist, but she was sending all these well, if you don't listen to me, listen to these Chinese people, and they were all like propaganda, State Department, like she did no research. A simple Wikipedia search.
She was listing a bunch of resources that were like National Endowment for Democracy backed, or literally like the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is really funny because it's like people, will see the words Uyghur or they'll see Xinjiang and assume that whatever it is like impartial and objective and fair and in favor of people who've had atrocities done against them. And I'm like, but this compendium of stories that you're sending me is compiled by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is itself backed by the defense industry. So what are you trying to tell me right now? It's so tough because I guess to like the average person who doesn't read that much into this stuff, I probably come across like a crazy person. But like it doesn't take much to simply look into who is funding these projects and what interests might they have in funding these projects. Like what strategic policy interests would they be going after? And it doesn't take much to figure out that if it's a national endowment for democracy, they have literally said that they do in the open what the CIA was previously doing in private. Like that's what the purpose of it is to foment dissent, to foment anti-communism, and to institute regime change.
And even if you look at the Asian publications and the people in charge of them, like a simple Google search, when that woman was, talking to you, I was like, did you even like do a simple Google search about who that is that you're citing and what that, like just because it says the Asian such and such doesn't automatically mean you can trust it. But not just that, you don't believe that anyway, because you're actually arguing with Asian people on Twitter using these sites. So, the fact that you're saying if you don't trust, she was telling actual Asian people, if you don't trust me, listen to Asian people. And I just hate that because
listen to Gordon Chan. Gordon Chan is the best source on China. I mean, this guy who is claimed to fame is writing a book about China's pending collapse, China's coming collapse in 2001. I mean, he has been wrong for like 19 years, but he's still esteemed guest on CNN, MSNBC, all the mainstream channels as a China expert. In America, you always fail to the top, as long as you're saying what they want to hear.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, also, Q, did you finish your point? I want to make sure you.
Oh no! I just I just wanted to say that, like, people don't do the basic work of figuring out where they're getting their political information from. But the other thing that I wanted to say was, like, the only reason that I'm being this tenacious about it is because Canada just voted. The opposition parties got together and held a vote in the House of Commons, which is our version, I guess you could say. Like, House of Commons is like the House, and they voted 200. So it was unanimous, 266 to nothing, out of all the people who did vote, to essentially charge China with genocide. Now,
I'm sorry, go on.
That has implications for me as a political writer, because it's like, and as somebody who openly identifies as communist, because now I'm forced to have a conversation about why did our elected representatives listen to people that were funded by literal State Department cutouts and not do the due diligence of, if you're going to charge China with genocide, then send if this is something that you're interested in and it's something that you want to make sure that you get right, send an envoy to China. Say, we're going to go to the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. We're going to have a look at the facilities. We're going to have a conversation with people. We're going to conduct an investigation. We're going to do this for the purpose of making sure that one of our largest trade partners is on the up and up. That this charge of genocide, like, if it's true, then we have to do something about it. And if it's not, we have to figure out where these accusations of human rights abuses are coming from. That is the rational choice, I think, for any policymaker. What's happened instead is this, I think, what amounts to basically an empty and meaningless gesture that I think is there for the purpose of punishing people. And I think who's going to end up coming down on the hardest are Uyghur workers, who will essentially be removed from the supply chain.
Yeah, I just follow up real quick. I mean, I have a Canadian friend who commented on this Canadian Parliament passing genocide resolution. He said, virtue signaling is like 50% of the Canadian foreign policy under either mainstream party. The other 50% is lobbying for their mining company and the whatnots. And there's a tweet by Don Hughes I saw this morning. He said, now that Canada has resolved China is committing genocide, the obvious next step would be a full trade embargo to inflict economic pain. Canada's Navy could interdict major American shipping routes on still collaborating with the regime. I mean, this is basically the Canadian Parliament resolution is meaningless. It's just a grandstanding. It means nothing because it means it doesn't hurt for these politicians to make these grand gestures, right? But they're not gonna. It costs them nothing. It costs them nothing to say something like this, right? Rather they're not gonna
in the short term.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's counterproductive to Canada's economic interests in the medium and long term. But in the short term, no one's going to get canceled for saying China is a genocidal Nazi-like state. No one's going to get canceled for that.
Yeah, I mean that's why we have many of these people doing this, because there's no penalty. What's a downside?
Exactly. There's no downside.
That's why you have American senators like Blackburn, like Tim. Like Cottons, like Hawley, they all jump on this anti-China wagon because whatever they say on China, that shift away attention from what's going on in US right now. And there's no downside for them to say China is bad. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, Teen, if you could expand on that, because Teen actually was talking about that before the show, about how for regular people, including leftists in America, there's no political upside to countering unsupported claims about China. And he was talking about if they're proven correct or if they're proven false. There's
Yeah, well, that's my I mean, when I saw this sort of pile-on that was going on with Q on Twitter, my reaction was, what is the incentive for Q to not just fold and be like, okay, if you're gonna call me a genocide denier, I'll just say I don't really care that much, so fuck it, I'm not tweeting about this topic anymore. What would incentivize someone to actually speak up against this? There is no incentive other than you're a journalist,
is
right?
that the incentive is that apparently I'm a grifter and I'm doing this for my audience, when I literally do not make any money from being on the internet, like none whatsoever. And people are actually, I think, more pissed off with me for talking about this than anything else. So I'm not really sure what they think my incentive is.
Well, I don't think you have an incentive in that sense, right? I mean, I think that the incentive would be, okay, I want to get this story right, or I have a longer term view of there's a bigger story that needs to be understood here, other than these, what I would say, hysterical claims of Nazis and genocide and all. Oh, hey, Amanda's here.
Hey.
Hey.
How is everyone? Carl, Haiti.
Glad to talk to you for the first time. Holy smokes.
I was just listening to Carl's really extensive history lesson, and then I wanted to jump on to join the discussion.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Has everybody met Amanda? I know this is Q's first time. Carl.
Just know, yeah, sorry.
Okay. No,
I want to know Amanda from Twitter, but I haven't met before.
Yeah, Amanda's been on our pod. Carl and Amanda, you all have been on like Chinese state television together.
Yeah,
it's official, not our shells.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, please continue.
Yeah, go ahead, Keen.
Oh no, yeah, no, I was just saying that again, T, like if think about it, if you're, let's say you're a leftist in America, okay, if you go out and hysterically claim that China is like a Nazi-like state and it's committing genocide or whatever, I mean, okay, if you're let's just say we don't have any information about what's going on in China. If it turns out you're correct, then okay, you're correct, right? If it turns out that everything you said was wrong and it wasn't actually going on, you're not going to get canceled for it because you were just making claims against a state enemy. It's not like someone's going to come and be like, whoa, you said something inaccurate about China, now you're screwed. China as a country isn't like a protected class, right? It's not, no one's sensitive about China. But if you want to push back on these on these sort of like hysterical claims, and they're later proven true, now you're cancelable because you were saying a bad thing. If you speak up against it and it turns out later that they were false and you were correct, there's no upside for you. Well, it's not like you're going to win the big sweepstakes.
They're trying to cancel me right now. So they're trying to cancel me right now. I'm reading a tweet right now. It says, Blumenthal, Norton, Carl Zah, and the rest who press the denialist line are using the same argument Holocaust deniers use. The pictures are all fake, survivors are all lying, etc. They're obsessed too, like QAnon believer. To be frank, I don't see why they should be allowed a platform to spread disinfos like this. I mean, people already, I'm just trying to provide more context and more information. And people are saying, no, that's genocide denial. Let's boot him off. I mean,
what they said to you was the same kind of thing that they would say during the Red Scare in the McCarthy area, which is like, I mean, Amanda, you saw me say this on Twitter, was like, it was just shocking to me to see like, okay, I'm a white leftist using what an evangelical person who works for the victims of the memorial for the victims of communism.
Yeah,
okay, so he's evangelical Christian, but you're using what he says against a black Marxist or a black communist. Well, I think it just gives people leverage that they otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah, the default position now is just to believe any claim against China, no matter how ridiculous. That's what the atmosphere is like now. And you can make any sort of claim, no matter like how cartoonishly evil, no matter how outlandish, and people will believe you because people already have this idea of China as this dystopian, totalitarian. Like the claims that they make are just like so ridiculous. Like, I don't know. I have this theory that any sort of group that people are claiming that the Chinese government is repressing, like all roads lead to organ harvesting, right? No matter like that happens with the Falun Gong. Like people say that the Falun Gong, the Chinese government are detaining them, and then they're like harvesting their organs. And I've heard people say that about the Uyghurs too. And if you trace like all this information, like where it actually goes back to, and this is why I wanted to like jump on, was in terms of the Uyghurs, most of the information that we get, most of the reporting, most of the sources that are cited, they come from just like a handful of sources. They come from Adrian Zenz, who you've already talked about. They come from a handful of NGOs that are funded by the NED, like the Uyghur Human Rights Project. And then they also, a lot of them also come from this woman named Rushan Abbas, who was a radio free, she was a Radio Free Asia journalist back in the 90s. And then she was contracted by the Department of Defense like in 2002, and she became an interpreter at Guantanamo. And then now she's this Uyghur human rights activist who's the head of one of these NGOs that's funded by the NED. So if you read, any sort of mainstream reporting on Xinjiang, like I guarantee you, Adrian Zenz will be cited, and then usually like one of these as well, one of these NGOs or Rushan Abbas.
Rushan Abbas is on record of saying, that actually the Uyghurs didn't fare too bad in Guantanamo. She said actually what China is doing to Uyghur is worse than what the United States is doing in Guantanamo, and overall, the Guantanamo treatment wasn't too bad. That's what she said. It's totally ridiculous.
One of the things that I think really needs to be talked about is Adrian Zenz is more of a credible source than you're giving him credit for. I mean, first off, like we said, he's white, so that gives him an automatic weight. But also, he has like books like this, Worthy to Escape, Why All Believers Will Not Be Raptured Before the Tribulation. It talks about how Christians need to understand the end times are coming in rapture. You can't just expect Jesus to save you. And he talks, about, it's got 3 stars, 7 ratings. That's and it's a great discussion of it here, and fascinating journey through the pages of the Bible, showing biblical prophecies, about the rapture, and it's going to prepare you and equip you for the times ahead. And you can't really argue with that. This is a guy you should this is a guy you should believe blindly. Mm-hmm.
He actually said that he was on mission from God to do what he's doing right now, to lead this whole Xinjiang crusade against China. He said that, Adrian Zenz.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I believe it, and he's also trying to sue another expert for something as well,
Joshua
right?
Landis. Yeah. Joshua Landis is actually a legitimate American scholar on Syria, and he just happened to tweeted an article from Gray Zone which debunked Adrian Zenz, and by calling him a right-wing ideologue. And Adrian Zenz took offense. He said, I will take you to court for calling me a right-wing ideologue. I mean, like, well, you wrote Beyond Rapture. How do you describe yourself?
No, that's factual. That's something you can trust. You can take it to the bank. And something that's really interesting about I mean, all this stuff that Q was talking about that people had to scrutinize him based on no facts, like he's interested, he's making money and all this stuff. These people, including the leftists, don't ask any of these questions about the interlocutors on the other side. Like they never say, hey, are you making any money off of this? No. And a lot of them are. Do you have any type of interest or conflicts of interest? None of that gets said. And this is
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna show this and let Amanda talk about it, and then I was gonna pass it off to Teen to say what he was gonna say. But I thought it was funny. Amanda put, if you read enough articles about Xinjiang in the Western media, a certain pattern emerges. So this casual little things, she's highlighting them. It is nearly impossible to independently assess if any one factory relies on forced labor. Reuters could not independently verify the authenticity of the list. CNN cannot independently verify the authenticity of this video or the date it was shot. Like, it's a constant theme. CNN has only been able to independently verify some of the records contained in the documents. And the last thing I'll say,
but then we ran it by Adrian Zenz, and he said they were 100. So we'll print it.
He speaks no Mandarin, but he got a direct line from Jesus saying, I have a memo about the rapture. And by the way, here's a supplement about China while I'm at it. And also, there was the gray zone. Something happened interestingly yesterday. The gray zone got hit with this thing on it, a little warning, a new warning that Twitter has that says, oh, these documents are based on this article is based on leaked documents. Don't trust it. And it was about Russia. And they were sounding the alarm because it was about American complicity and bad stuff that's going on with Russia. You know, for libs and moderates right now, Russia is the accepted, bad guy. You can't show anything that makes America look worse than Russia. But the gray zone also had an article about China and some of the fuckery going on with them that was based on leaked documents, and they did not or I might have it reversed, but basically it was a double standard.
Yeah, it's actually a gray zone article about how BBC, Reuters, and all these news organizations were in active cahoots with the UK Foreign Office, to manufacturing fake stories about Russia to do disinfos. What I actually don't understand is that the people on the left, right? They understand that US has been lying about Bolivia, about Venezuela, about Cuba, but they believe everything mainstream media says about China. So, US has been lying about Iraq.
I think because there is no real American left in the sense that it has no sense of like the global conception of the left. And so if you see like an AOC or a Bernie even go out and they represent, let's say, the leftmost wing of American politics, let's say, they'll always say like, oh, by our socialism, we mean Denmark and Norway. We don't mean Venezuela or Cuba. So there's
White
like
socialism.
Can I point out one thing? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, no. Can I just point out one thing? T, can you go back to the first screenshot that was in that tweet? Sure. This is what they're saying as is proof that this is forced labor in Xinjiang. This is the right one. This is the right one. And I want to say that you can only fit 4 screenshots in a tweet, but this is a very common theme among any sort of mainstream story on Xinjiang. Like I've read a lot within the past few months. And almost always, buried somewhere, they will say that, this person's testimony, it was impossible for us to verify. We couldn't verify that this factory was engaging in forced labor. But it's an anti-China story, and the publication wants to get clicks, so they go ahead and run it. But I think there was like a BBC article I read a few days ago, and they ran like 3 different testimonies of people who were supposedly in detention. And for all 3 of them, they said for each that their stories couldn't be verified. But in this particular,
if you just click on the right arrow, you'll see the 3 that she put up. Right? You put up 4 different screenshots.
Yeah, but these are from 4 different stories. I'm saying I read one the other day. It was one BBC story, and they said 3 different times within that story that of 3 different testimonies. But in this one, they are saying that, they're claiming that this factory is engaging in forced labor. And then they say that it's impossible to independently assess if it's actually like engaging in forced labor. And the proof that they use that it is that it's just by the fact that it has high walls and barbed wire around the fences. So they make the assumption that this is a factory and the workers there can't get out. But correct me if I'm wrong, Carl, but isn't this really common in China? Like even neighborhoods, houses will have like high walls and barbed wire around them. So this is just a ridiculous assumption that they jump to just from seeing this.
Yeah, I mean, most of the Chinese campuses, schools, kindergartens, they all have high walls. I mean, this is like for people who live in China, had China experience, they wouldn't even bat an eye. But then, they would make a video putting on ominous music in the background and focus on the barbed wire and make it very convincing to their viewers that something really fucked up is going on. But again, like it's I actually read Adrian Zen's report about claiming that the Uyghur slave labor using in cotton picking in China. What his evidence is in Kashgar and Khotan. 80% of the labor force is local labor, and he quoted a Chinese source where they had the Chinese cadres went into the fields with these Uyghur cotton pickers. It says like this is a sign of the Chinese government sending their people, keeping tabs on them. And we also know, because the Chinese government is running a detention camp of keeping up to 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camp. So we know like this threat of detention always hangs over these Uyghurs who are asked to work in the fields. I mean, this is basically how he made his case why these Uyghurs working in the cotton fields are.
Yeah, and Carl, you can see, I mean, what Amanda's pointing out, in my opinion, is even an improvement in that they would even admit that they can't corroborate it. Because like what I was seeing before on the screenshot, I saw, a claim in The Verge for some article. For some reason, they wanted to cite that there were 1 million Uyghurs in detention. And this is actually even better than what was before, because they actually link the site. And they were linking to Vox that had made the same claim that there were 1 million Uyghurs, or between 1 and 2 million Uyghurs, that were detained. So The Verge is citing Vox, and then Vox actually did the responsible thing and linked to where they were citing it, which is the U.S. State Department website, where Scott Busby, who's Deputy Assistant Secretary, just said that this is the U.S. government's own assessment based on nothing, based on intelligence. Based on the intelligence community assessments.
Trust us, bro. Yeah.
Yeah, but by the time that's gone 2 levels up to something like, Vox or Verge, people don't question it anymore. It's just it's out in the wild at that point.
Yeah, so apparently in 2019, around June 2019, Chinese government made an announcement that they actually shut down all of their vocational training centers in Xinjiang. The New York Times had a couple follow-up pieces. They just says, well, there's impossible for us to verify the Chinese government claim. But then they just go on and keep on saying there's still 1 million Uyghurs in camp. I mean, now like this almost commonly accepted like a universal fact or truth. There's 1 million Uyghur in camp.
And I think something here that's in the same thread, and I saw it, and I thought it would be a good thing to talk about, is something, and I've seen Q make similar disclaimers. One of the things that people try to do, but not just with this debate, but the internet in general, kills nuance, kills any middle ground. If you don't believe one extremist position, then you automatically must be believing the opposite. So a common thing I've seen get thrown, especially against Q, but I'm sure it's happened to Amanda as well. I just didn't see it in real time like I did with Q. But this idea of, so you're saying China's doing nothing wrong, or they're angels, or there's absolutely, and when you frame it like that, then all the person has to do is show anything bad, and then their point is made, because the idea is if you can show that they're guilty of anything wrong, then they must be guilty of everything that they're accused of. And this thing here that Amanda said, and I don't have the one that Q said handy, but I've seen Q say similar things. So how would you deal with the idea that people are accusing you guys of saying that there's that China must be some angels that have never done anything wrong?
Well, look, the discussion is about whether there's a genocide going on in Northwest China, which is a very serious accusation, right? And carries all the connotations. So that is what I am trying to provide context and information for. I actually stated in multiple occasions I have reservations about the Chinese government methods, right? But at the same time, who are we in the West to pointing fingers? When we are guilty of doing much worse things. That's all. That's basically my position.
I think though, you can game this out though, because like we talk about what is America saying, but that does, obviously America doesn't speak in one voice. But I'm kind of curious about how the left deals with this, because the thing that is surprising is like the way that the left gets red baited into backing these sort of narratives. And I just find it ironic that you have a left which will say things like, and AOC has said this a lot of times, why is it that, every time we talk about budget, and how are you going to pay for it, that when it comes to war, we never have to talk about budget, but when it comes to social programs or healthcare, we suddenly have to ask, how are you going to pay for it? And I think that means that the American left understands deeply that the priority that the defense budget has over all other things is exactly why they can't get what they want. But on the other hand, to push back against the narratives that ultimately, because I think, Amanda, you linked an article that basically just said it, that all this fear mongering over China is basically to justify increased defense budgets, which have actually been kind of shrinking in the past year.
That
right?
was from Defense News, which is a newspaper or a publication that serves like people in the defense industry. So like they know what's going on, and you can get like more honest and above board commentary from people from a publication that serves that industry rather than the New York Times or the Washington Post. Yeah.
So I guess I'm advocating for this point. Like, it's just fucking tiring to go out and try and correct people and get all the it took Carl an hour and 10 minutes just to give a little bit of background as to what's going on. It's a very complicated situation. Your average person actually doesn't really care about what's going on. They just want to make sure that they say the right thing at the right time, so later they don't get screwed, right?
And that's
so
not
I think
something you put in TikToks or tweets. The kind of
you just don't want to. I don't want to lay a landmine so I can get canceled later for saying this wrong thing. So err on the side of genocide, I think, is a safe bet.
And I saw what was happening, like to Q the past few days, I just kept seeing people linking the same articles over and over and over. And then he would respond to them and, sort of draw the links between the sources of these articles and then, maybe like these defense industry funded think tanks. But like nobody seemed to be taking it into consideration, and they just kept linking the same like Adrian Zen's NGO sourced articles over and over again. So I don't really know.
I can tell you exactly what it is. At least this is my theory. All right, I think with a lot of people who think that they're on the left. Essentially, like for the most part, they're like milquetoast social democrats, right? But they want things like healthcare, they want student loan forgiveness, they want $15 an hour minimum wage, like they want like things that will enable people to live in this capitalist hellscape. But their foreign policy takes are consistently shit, And the reason for that is that they've been raised in this like miasma of anti-communism and American jingoism for so long that they've never really developed a skeptical form of politics that considers that that Dr. Streetsburden-Stelly talks about this a lot, actually. And now that I actually remember who says this, like I'm going to credit her every single time. She says that, you know, people, she attributes it to Black people who believe that, you know, America would be, you know, a great nation, but for the fact that it's racist. And I think where it comes to a lot of these, like, you know, white radical liberals and progressives, they believe that America would be a great nation, but for the fact that it doesn't have healthcare and student loan forgiveness and so on and so on. Essentially, they agree with the American foreign policy doctrine, but I think where it comes to things like the Iraq War, Syria, Libya, etc., they actually, because I don't really see a hell of a lot of dissent leading up to these foreign policy adventures. You always hear after the fact, after it turns out that everything we were told was a total hoax. Everyone's like, oh, you gullible Marx, I can't believe you fell for that, right? And it's like, okay, but you were right there with him because you didn't say shit. So like when people were talking about, you know, Muammar Gaddafi providing his troops with Viagra so that they could go out and commit mass rapes and that they were engaged in the act of genocide, or that Bashar al-Assad was just like indiscriminately gassing Kurds and trying to commit a genocide against Kurdish people, or that Saddam Hussein, and this one, even though it was debunked, I think in 1993, I was still hearing it in 2003 and 2004, was that he was having people yank babies out of incubators. And then this new one that I heard in the run up to the Iraq War, that he was rounding up political dissenters and pushing them into industrial shredders. So you hear these incredibly like horrific, these barbaric and salacious stories, and as a human rights advocate, you think to yourself, like, I would never want to be on the wrong side of this. But what's actually underneath all that, like what's latent to that, is the Orientalism. You're willing to believe these things about people because you believe, like, people that you've never really come into contact with, haven't really met, haven't had conversations with, and you don't speak the same language. You're willing to believe incredibly barbaric things about those people. And I think where it comes to China, because people have been raised in this this environment of xenophobia for their entire lives. I mean, like the Yellow Peril narrative has been around since, you know, the United States' first immigration act that had teeth. So we're talking about like 150 and more years of history. You know, this is the environment that you're raised in. And people want to believe that they're impervious to this kind of propaganda, but at some subconscious level, they are succumbing to it. So I think that when you have a situation like this one that allows people to give into it and just be like, oh no, these people are terrible, like we have to do something about it, what they're unwilling to confront is that underlying anti-communism and that underlying xenophobia, and what they've turned it into instead is a warped form of progressivism. And I'll give you an example of that. Somebody was did the exact same fucking thing that Adrian Zenz did, which was go through government statistics on birth rates among the Uyghur population in Xinjiang, and said, well, there's a 50% drop off in the birth rate. What could possibly explain this? These people are being forcibly sterilized. So like did all sorts of like, you know, mathematical chicanery with numbers and so forth, and showed graphs and everything else. And I was reading through it. I was like, okay. Yep. Adrian Zenz said the exact same fucking thing. I've already read this paper. I've seen this for the Jackson Institute. But I noticed that one thing that he didn't mention in all of that was that in 2017, a universal two-child policy came into effect. So the one-child policy previously had a carve-out for ethnic minorities, meaning that if you belonged to a particular minority, especially like people out in rural areas, they were allowed to have more than one child for very obvious reasons. If you're a subsistence farmer, you need like the help. You can't just have one child. You need a family. And then of course there's things like infant mortality rates and children not living long enough. So there's multiple reasons why there would be exemptions, but there was an exemption carved out for the Uyghur minority, and actually for Han people who lived in rural areas side by side, meaning that if you had, for example, if you were in a rural area as an Uyghur family, you could have 3 children. Han families were allowed to have 2 children in those same areas, right? once the one-child policy ended, I believe that was 2015, and then the universal two-child policy came into effect in 2017. What happens is that everyone is allowed 2 children. Like, doesn't matter if you're an ethnic minority or not, everyone has 2 children. Plus, there's access to birth control, family planning, etc. Millions of condoms are being distributed all across the countryside. There's access to family planning tools. There's higher education, etc. But what happens is that if you break the rule by having more than 2 children, you're fined for it. Now, whether you or not you are okay with that, this idea of coercive birth control is an entirely separate issue to me, because now you're talking about coercive birth control. You're not talking about genocide. But the issue here is that you can pay the fine, and in many cases, people are able to avoid the fine by having an IUD placed, right? I believe that they had the option of Depo-Provera, but I'm not sure. So I will say, I know for sure there was IUD. As for the other methods of birth control, not 100% sure. So I'll leave that off the table for now. Now, if everybody is getting IUDs placed after having 2 children, what do you think effect that has on the birth rate?
Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody mentions the fact that there is this family planning policy, this birth control policy that could very much represent a significant portion of that drop off. But then what's not mentioned is in Zen's report, the amount of IUD placements that he reports people would have had to have 3 or 4 IUD placements per person in order for any of these numbers to make sense. So it's read so completely uncritically that it just gets repeated in leftist circles. And I'm thinking to myself, this is fucking focus on the family language. This is anti-choice language. This is the language of somebody who believes that there's such a thing as white genocide, and white women who are engaging birth control and not having as many children as possible, and they're intermarrying, etc. Forced intermarriage with non-white people is what's propagating white genocide, and you see the exact same shit coming out of people's mouths where it comes to family planning policy. So it's just it's wild to me how these right-wing ideologue tropes get translated into left progress. I'm gonna put a huge scare quotes around this, left progressive language, because they're so desperate for a win, and they're so desperate for the state to line up with things that they already think and things that they believe subconsciously, and they want validated, that they're willing to attack other people that have left principles to say, I was fucking right and you're a genocide denier. That's what really bothers me.
One of the evidence Adrian Zen cited is the IUDs that China manufactured didn't have a string where you can pull it out yourself. I don't know how many. How
many people get IUDs placed that have there's no copper wire just hanging out the coochie? I've never heard of this before in my life.
One thing I think you were describing that I think is one thing I think that explains the phenomenon you're describing is I feel like a lot of these social democrat type of leftists, you can kind of tell on how they tweet, how they talk, what they're into, that a lot of them were basically Daily Show liberals just a couple of years ago. A lot of them are kind of, from what I've seen, newly minted leftists. They heard some podcasts and everything and think that they have changed a lot more than they have, and it's really a narcissism of small differences. There's times I'll make fun of something like the West Wing, and someone will be like, "Oh, you're just bashing it because it's trendy to bash," and it's okay, you still have the beating heart of a centrist Clintonite liberal in you. You just want, like you said, healthcare and student loans forgiven, but you really haven't changed. And I think that's a lot of what we see. These people still, because one of those big things is American exceptionalism. That's a big part of centrist.
There's such a dissonance, cognition dissonance, because if you want healthcare, if you want education be subsidized, right? You can't also have a big military budget that's sucking up all the resources.
Well,
right?
they're ostensibly opposed to larger and larger military budgets every year, and they try to oppose it, but they get steamrolled because they know. I think the left wing of mainstream American politics is constantly self-conscious of being marginalized as disloyal or commies or whatever, and this is true of liberals too. They always have to
conversation. I was going to say, while we were in this conversation, I got called a tanky by a member of the the Canadian Federal Parliament. So hey,
Right.
Oh, nice.
progress.
Wow.
This
And he
just
said,
came.
so he says that actually, I'll read the tweet to you, okay? Because like,
Okay.
I was just a little bit perplexed as to why he's like, going after somebody else's vote. But I say to him like, your vote yesterday is essentially like what the end result of this will be is that American manufacturers are going to be afraid of getting bad PR, and this will end up removing Uyghur people from the supply chain. And I've had multiple conversations about this, and that's like sort of the agreement that we've come to. Like, and when I say have had conversations about this, I mean I've had conversations with people from China who are in China about this, and his response to me was, "Your tanky takes are terrible."
Yeah,
And
I
it's
mean,
just like it's all thought termination cliches.
It's thought termination, and I think if you look at like actual rational modes of discourse, let's take like science or law. There's a very simple principle that applies, which is like the bigger the claim, the bigger the burden of evidence. Right? The more you're going to claim, the bigger the thing that you're accusation that you're making or claim that you're making, the more evidence you have to bring to the table. But so we're clearly not in that kind of discourse, because here it's like the bigger the claim, I'm going to up this to actual genocide, the more people will believe it. If it's a small thing, people don't care. But like if it's a big thing like genocide, everyone runs away.
I don't even think it's just the bigger the claim. I think there's a combination of the bigger the claim and the more obviously bad the identity of the target. So it's a combination of the two, and you kind of see it like with just even the sex harassment discourse now. It's like, if you, I mean, like if you just have that thing about believe victims, but even the phrase "believe victims" assumes that the person's a victim. Like, there's nobody who says don't believe victims, but they changed the word from accuser to victim. So it's kind of like you presuppose it's a loaded thing. Nobody thinks that they're disbelieving victims, but they don't say believe accusers because that doesn't sound as good. And it's kind of the same thing with they use the word genocide the same way. They use the word genocide.
I'm all about believing victims. So I pulled up the testimonial of Toussaint, who was recently featured in BBC and CNN about allegation of systematic mass rape in the camps. So I pulled up her testimonial from early 2020 when the interview she gave to the BuzzFeed, and she said the torture is mostly mental. I wasn't physically abused, but there's always a fear in the back of my mind. And you can pull up that BuzzFeed article to Toussaint about Uyghurs in camp, and now she's saying
Toussaint Zayawudun.
Yes,
I probably completely butchered that name. Yeah,
believe her, but I just don't know which version of her story to believe. She told BuzzFeed one version of the story, but as times go on, you see her story gets more and more elaborate.
The thing about that one, and I hesitate to bring that one up sometimes because I think like, okay, maybe that was her first interview, and stories can maybe she'll feel more comfortable telling her full story, but when she's faced with like a massive American publication and this news is going to be like broadcast all over the world, maybe she's not comfortable telling the full story. I'm willing to completely grant that, right? It's just that the time after which she changes the story is after she's come in contact with the World Uyghur Congress. Mm-hmm. That's what makes the skin on the back of my neck go up, is this literal CIA cutout, this organization that's received, I think, something to the order of like $350,000 from the National Endowment for Democracy in 2019 alone. Are you telling me that you having contact with them had nothing to do with your story all of a sudden becoming a hell of a lot more salacious? Even if I grant that that's also not the case, even though multiple other people who were brokered through them and with oh my gosh, I forget the name of this other organization, this Kazakh organization, which is how her and a lady, I forget her first name. Her last name was Soitbay, but their stories immediately changed after coming in contact with them, right? Here's what actually bugged me the most, was that she said that her passport was seized and she was under house arrest, which is why she had to cross the border into Kazakhstan to meet her husband. Except her passport. So she left in September of 2019, but her passport was renewed for 10 years in June of 2019. Are you telling me that it's either one of two things? Either the Chinese state are a bunch of bumbling oafs that have no idea who they're supposed to be persecuting, so they persecute everybody, or they are dastardly sinister and are deliberately targeting people with like hyper surveillance on steroids, and they know exactly what they're doing. But both can't be true at the same time. So you're telling me that in either of these two scenarios, some bureaucrat is going to receive an application in person from somebody who wants to renew their passport for 10 years, and they're going to grant that, and this is supposed to be a political prisoner. I cannot fucking believe that. I'm sorry.
And you know what CNN did? CNN posted
out the passport date.
They post out passport, but yeah, exactly. They
posted the passport. They posted the entire passport. Okay, I think they blurred out the passport number, which of course that's like, you know, proper journalism is you blur out the passport, or the passport number, but they also blurred out the passport date, like the date of application to the date of expiry.
But can I just point out though that as much sense as you're making and everything that you're talking about and that Carl's mentioned and Amanda, like, no one's gonna listen to it because like they don't give a shit because they don't care that they're wrong, is my point, right? And that's why it's so fucking tiring. And I guess what I'm saying is, like, you know, I look at this discourse and it's like there are people who are like, I think a lot of people on the left, so to speak, like, or a lot of people that are pushing against this want to be right, and the people that you're pushing against don't give a shit about whether they're right or not. And I feel like there's almost, when I actually look at the way some of the right wing pushes against interventionism as a foreign policy, they're just a lot more blunt about it. They're just like, look, I don't give a shit what's going on in China. I don't care about anything beyond our borders. I don't want to send our people abroad to fight war. I don't want my kid going to a fucking war that the globalists or whatever are waging. And that's as thought terminating as, in a way, but it's, I think it accomplishes the goal better. And I had to say this, I mean, because I abhor Trump, but Trump is actually one of the few like American leaders that has ever said some of the shit that he said that I was actually like, I can't imagine anyone else that would say this. For example, I think he was being interviewed by Fox News, and he was being pushed about the Russia thing. You know, the Democrats were accusing him of colluding with the Russians and how they were like, the Russians are really evil. They assassinate people and stuff. And his response was like, you think we're so innocent? He's like, we got some bad people too. And I was blown away that he would say something like that. And when it came to China, he said something very similar. He said, in starting the trade war, he said, look, I don't really blame the Chinese. The Chinese took advantage of us. If we had smarter leaders, if I was in charge, I would have done the same thing as China. So like, I think in a way there is this need for the people on the left to be right. But versus people, I think on the right wing who are just more goal oriented. They just want to get what they want. And if the left wing wants if they want Medicare for all or whatever, they have to get the fucking weight of the defense budget off their shoulders, and they should adopt, in my opinion, a thought terminating response to this stuff. Like, you just want to start a fucking war. You're falling for it, and no matter what, even if this shit in Xinjiang, even if it was a genocide, I don't give a shit. I feel like there needs to be a little bit more of like a gut-based response to be like, you're going down the path of fighting another fucking war, and I'm just not having it. And honestly, I don't give a shit what's going on in China because this ain't China. That's the other side of the planet.
But honestly, a lot of these Twitter rhetorics is all about virtue signaling. Though it's not. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of stake in it, and I think that's why they take the position they do. Because
fuck the people on Twitter. But I'm just saying that to try and combat virtue signalers with good information and thoughtful analysis as to whether they inked out, the expiration or the issue date of a passport is not going to convince them one way or another. I think what would be better is to just bash them, to say, you're just falling for the fucking tricks that, all the military industrial complex think tanks are pushing because you're a useful idiot and you're the reason the left always loses and we end up in a fucking war. And then you're going to have to, in 10 years, look back with regret on everything that you did.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the thing is they never do look back with regret on anything they did. They don't. They just pretend that they had the correct position all along. And that's what I was trying to say, is that like we always in the moment, they get caught up in the consent manufacturing machine, and then afterwards they get really self-righteous to the point of arrogance. And it just really fucking blows me, because the people who were right about it in the first you know what this reminds me of in a way?
Yeah.
You know how Dr. Tommy Curry would he had like many salient points, everything from like anti-black misandry to the limits of standpoint theory, etc., the limits of intersectionality, and so on, right? He had what I think were fairly principled, but the thing is he came in on that too early. Have you noticed that people say the same things that he was saying 4, 5, 6 years ago, but don't credit him with any of it? Like act like they came to these conclusions all by themselves. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. I have noticed that. I put this tweet in here because it came in here while we were talking, and I thought it was a good example. And I'm not like trying to just pick on this guy or dunk on him, but I just kind of find it interesting, like no matter what we said, it's still kind of led with the foregone conclusion, which is what I compare to the whole believe victims thing, where the actual thing that people are trying to do is trying to figure out if there's a victim, and if so, what are they a victim of. But the other people on the other side keep leading with the foregone conclusion, which of course, if that was the case, we wouldn't be having this debate. If it was about, if we could all agree that this person was a victim, there would be no debate, because everyone, whether on the right or the left or the middle, nobody actually says, hey, if there's an actual proven victim, don't believe them. So it's like it's an unfair, and that's the kind of thing here where what people are kind of litigating is what kind of targeting is there and what extent is there of the targeting. But a lot of the people that we are saying are virtue signaling can't get past that point. They just keep jumping ahead to, yes, there is a genocide. Yes, there is. So that's kind of like what you see here. So it's like the left position is to be critical of any state picking up the war on terror playbook and targeting a minority population. But that assumes that that's not our playbook, that we're okay with states picking up the war on terror playbook and targeting minority populations.
Well, and he's also misrepresenting the playbook, because the playbook of America is what matters, right? What that position is saying is like, look, if China's doing a bad thing, we will buy into and support the narrative coming out of Raytheon funded think tanks, because that's the quote right thing to do. And you just end up in another world war. I think that position is basically you're being a useful idiot. I think there just needs to be a less thought out, just straight up anti-interventionist, anti anything that contributes to the military budget. It has to be goal oriented, not necessarily truth or goodness oriented.
I think this also speaks to what you were saying earlier, T, is that if you are in any way critical of the discourse about this right now, it's either you believe there's a genocide or you believe there's nothing going on at all. And this is, I feel like this is sort of represents that, because, even if we don't believe that there is what you would consider a genocide, doesn't mean that we don't think that there's nothing going on at all. But if there is something, like, you can make the argument that this is an extremely heavy-handed assimilationist program on the part of the CPC, that there is abuse, there is mistreatment, but what possibly could we, like sitting in the US, in Canada, or like anyone else in the US or Canada, do about it without relying on these like violent state mechanisms, such as sanctions, which would hurt the economy of Xinjiang even further? So that's what I'm confused about. Like, there is probably like something going on, but what position would we be in to like do anything about it? It's fundamentally like an internal affair. So I'm just confused as to like what we could possibly do about it without advocating for something like economic sanctions.
And saying that you want more proof
Carl, you're on
isn't
mute.
saying that you want more proof isn't the same as saying you don't want anything done if there is proof, which is
no. Here's the other part too, is that this is how I know that they're not serious. Because then my question is, okay, then what do you propose to do about it? Right? If okay, the left position where it comes to lawfare is that it's bad. Like, we don't do sanctions. Sanctions are group punishment, right? So I think a lot of people get confused with what it is that the position that they're staking out is supposed to have some sort of a consequence. And if the consequence of there being an actual genocide is lawfare, then that's essentially collective punishment. But you have to be able to prove that first. So I think what's making people a little bit weird about all this, I don't think that they actually want proof that a genocide is taking place, because then they have to stand behind targeted sanctions on China. And if you are going to stand behind targeted sanctions on China, you're standing behind immiserating the population. Or perhaps the sanctions won't have any effect whatsoever. So it's enough to simply beat your chest and say there's a genocide happening, right? Regardless of the fact that this is being built on, I would like not even just a flimsy case, but like like I said before, statistical malpractice. I also don't agree with this idea that you're supposed to say that the state taking action against any particular group of people is your default left position, and that's why we should support this. Like, it's not an ipso facto kind of thing. I'm fully willing to grant that there is institutional and interpersonal racism. I'm fully willing to grant that, for example, like colorism is a problem in China. I am fully willing to grant that there are ethnic tensions in China. Completely willing to grant that. And I'm not even going to do what people are going to describe as whataboutism and say, well, that problem exists here. My question after acknowledging these things is, okay, then what do we do about it? Because how do you, for people that live all the way across the planet, how are you supposed to have any kind of constructive and policy-based conversation about how another country inflicts institutional racism and how people inflict interpersonal racism? How are you supposed to do that from across the world? And the way that I know that they're not serious is because in the United States, not only does that exist, but you have a country right fucking next door, and this is entirely the fault of the United States, and the US still supports a dictator in this country, that is Haiti. The United States, along with Canada, Britain, Brazil, go into Haiti, kidnap an elected president, like just straight up kidnapped him, and installed a military dictatorship, a Duvalier's dictatorship, which to this day exists as a puppet state for the United States. And now Jovenel Moise has gone from ostensibly elected official, even though like Fami Lavalage is not allowed to participate in elections. So how democratic is that? But he granted himself another year's term. Like, there's just no precedent for this. He's like, yeah, I'm not stepping down. I'm president for another year. And the US is like, yeah, that's fine. You can be president for another year. Now, if people were serious about these human rights issues, they would be writing their Congress people to say, what the fuck? Why are we supporting this guy? Absolutely not. You need to bring a vote to the House floor to show that we are going to censure this country if Jovenel Moise does not have an election within the next 6 months or whatever amount of time, we're going to censure this country. We are going to make sure that Haiti is able to practice democracy. But they're not going to do that. Right? They're worried about what China's doing.
But Q, American people don't care about Haiti. American people can't find Haiti on a map. I mean,
no, wait, that's not entirely fair. I think that the reason I think well, you're right that Americans don't care, but I think the reasons Americans don't care is because there aren't these white papers that are written for the fucking Pentagon. Okay, yeah. So there's this 2013 white paper written by Bradley Thayer for the Pentagon, and they just come out and say this shit. They're saying whether China and the US are destined to compete for domination in international politics is one of the major questions facing the Pentagon. So in a competition with the PRC, the US must explore all of its advantages and all of the weaknesses of China so that we might find an asymmetry in our advantage. This study examines one such asymmetry, the strategic consequences of Chinese racism. US decision makers must recognize that China is a racist state, much closer to Nazi Germany than to the values upheld in the West, which is kind of ironic if you think about it. Most often, the Chinese do not even recognize their races as a problem. They believe that racism is a Western phenomenon and that Westerners are obsessed with race. This obsession is seen by the Chinese to be a strategic vulnerability of the West, whereas China is not affected by racism. That's the framing by which this hyper concern in the media sphere about Xinjiang, which Americans or CNN can't even locate it on a map. That's why this exists, is because they're enlisting the left to be useful idiots to destroy their own agenda. Because they know that as long as the left supports these or caves to these types of narratives, they will never get their domestic agenda fulfilled. And as for something like Haiti, they just don't give a shit because the Pentagon has not made this an issue for them to be red baited by. They're not even aware of this.
Something I would add too is that I think, a lot of these people, they don't even read like papers like that or anything. I think another thing that happens, I think everything you guys are saying is true. I'm just adding like another like faction of, because I don't think there's like a monolithic left that's doing this. I think there's different people on the left who are doing it for different reasons, and I think a lot of those leftists who were just like NPR tote bag libs like 4 years ago, and I think a lot of them still closetly are, like they still rewatch The West Wing every year, and still kind of do the same things. They're like very nominally left, but they're still basically at the end of the day normies and libs. Is a lot of them have this way, and you kind of saw it with Q's replies. With Q's replies, there was this woman, I forgot her name. It was Alex something, who tried to like dunk on you, like from behind the screen cap and everything, so that you wouldn't see it, and then you found her. But she was doing stuff which people
have been sending me other people's takes, which is why I should probably a lot of them I actually just ignore. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to give them the attention, but sometimes one of them will get under my skin, and I'm like, nah, I'm going to give this person a little love tap,
Yeah. She was one of them, but the way that she was arguing or whatever, even though she's supposed to be a lib, to me, I was like, okay, she's supposed to be a leftist. I'm like, okay, you were just basically, you're still in your heart a liberal, like. And one thing she did was she was like, if you don't believe me, Chinese people are saying this, and they're doing all this kind of like standpoint epistemology and like doing that hierarchy of oppression. And I think there's this kind of thing. They're not very sophisticated internationally, so they just think, okay, because what are some of like the most simplistic glib tropes? And it's like, okay, Chinese, Asian, model minority, proximity to whiteness, on the hierarchy of minorities, they're probably above a Muslim, which is brown. They're yellow, they're brown. If the person's black, then the person goes under. And this is how my simplistic, NPR way of judging who's right or wrong in any conflict. And whereas I think Haiti, you just see, okay, these are black people who are Haitian fighting with other black people. They don't know what to do with that. There's no easy kind of identity hierarchy. So they think, oh, it would actually be racist for me to join in because I'm supposed to listen to black people, and these are black people handling their own business. It would be like me jumping into argument. I think they're just really that simplistic and crude.
Yeah, so here's a curated list of like black people or Chinese people who agree with me that I haven't read. But you could say the same thing about like Uyghurs too. There are Uyghurs in China who contradict a lot of what the Uyghurs like the Uyghur testimonies that we're used to reading, but they just don't get picked up by Western media.
There's a video.
Oh, go ahead, team.
There's an actual video clip of Joe Biden. I forget, many years ago, where he literally said that Haiti could rise 300 feet out of the ocean or sink to the very bottom of it. And it honestly, he's like, that's ugly to say, but it wouldn't really make a goddamn bit of difference to the United States in terms of our interest. He literally said this on, as Q. I don't know if you've seen that, but that's the attitude towards Haiti. That's the attitude of our president. Is Haiti could fucking disappear tomorrow, and we really don't give a shit one way or another. So they don't say anything about what happens in Haiti because it doesn't matter. And when it comes to China, CNN can't even fucking locate Xinjiang on a map. But this is a very, very pressing issue, what's happening there. Why? Because we're in a fucking global competition with them for economic supremacy or whatever. I mean, that's why it matters. And so I think when people like whoever fucking said that on Twitter about how this is a bad discussion because the left's position on this is very consistent and, oh, you know, we just are opposed to any sort of war on terror tactics. No, you're being recruited as a useful idiot for something that's much bigger than your way of thinking, right? Like which atrocities or which problematic treatments of ethnic minorities around the globe, and there's too many of them to list. The ones that we are made to care about is not up to us. You know,
I want to go back to the government paper that you cited earlier, Teen, about how to leverage the Chinese racism to get them. There's a beautiful line in there. It says, but here in United States, we have already faced our past racism. We have resolved our racism by 1950s. So now, unlike China, right? That was like a matter of fact line in the paper saying, here in the United States, we already faced our racism by 1950, 1960.
I feel like I argued with that guy on Twitter, whoever wrote that paper.
And this is this is
Noah Smith said something similar before about how what's going on in which he's never been to China, admittedly, but he says what's going on in Xinjiang sounds an awful lot like Jim Crow America, but maybe a shade worse.
Yeah,
he doesn't even understand. He doesn't even understand America.
What he's saying? Oh my god,
he doesn't even understand America. So how can he understand China?
Yeah, I mean it's very convenient for a white guy to say that, in my opinion. That shows you the value of this stuff for a lot of liberals that want to sort of
but there was a black president.
It goes back to what Amanda and Q were saying earlier. It's like for people who live in the West, what can we do? In fact, we have more control. I mean, we can do more about what's happening in US. Yeah. We can theoretically do more about children held in cages on our border. Well, I say theoretically because our politicians don't give a shit at this point. Mm-hmm. But we could do more to raise awareness and to force the politicians, you know, at least potentially to do something about these children held in ice cages on the border. You know,
so
go ahead.
Go ahead. So this is what really bothered me about the Ilhan Omar tweet, where she was sort of feigning concern for Xinjiang like a week ago, right? Because, I mean, one way to look at it is that the reason China is implementing these policies is because there is a fear of the U.S. funding these separatist movements, right? So you, as a lawmaker, wouldn't it make more sense to focus on like the U.S. not funding these sorts of separatist movements? And then you would sort of, I mean, I feel like if that were lifted, that would give these countries more room to maneuver. You know what I mean? And I feel like that makes more sense, and for her to do as a U.S. lawmaker, rather than try and get China to do something that's in response to U.S. imperialism.
I think ultimately all the grandstanding by U.S. politicians, whether they're on the left or on the right, it's ultimately virtue signaling. They're just stating a position in which they themselves have very little stake in it. I mean, Ilhan Omar, she actually vetoed designating Armenian genocide as a genocide, but whereas because for whatever reasons, but on China issue, she loses nothing but gains everything by stating as a mainstream position that this is a genocide, because this is all about positioning herself or her domestic audience than what's actually happening. I mean, much of this has very little to do with welfare of actual Uyghur people in China.
No, but Carl, long term. I mean, in the longer term, that's why the Ilhan Omar wing of the party can never win, is because they won't push back on this. And I think trying to debunk allegations of genocide is probably not a winning strategy. But I think that the best politics to engage in is Team America, World Police. Like, where did that go? Where did the sort of just sort of like basic anti-interventionist, I don't really give a fuck about what's going on in the rest of the world ethic go? Where did that go? I don't know why suddenly the left feels like it's compelled to take a position on things like Xinjiang. Well, what do you care?
Because,
I guess that's the taboo question you can't ask, is what do you care about?
If you look at the Quad,
well, the thing is, they don't. That's the problem. I cannot. I don't believe that they actually do care is the thing. That I doubt people's intentions on this. I think people say that they care, but again, if you look at like what it is that people talk about, what they tweet about, the issues that are of the utmost importance to them, but also like, okay, so then what do you propose to do about any of this? You know what I mean? Like what is your solution? And I don't think that everybody has a responsibility to like fix the world, but at the very least, if you're going to charge genocide, which again is a very serious charge, then there's an obligation to do something about it. So then what is your solution?
But that's kind of what I mean when I say there's still fundamentally, operationally, liberals. They're still mainstream Saturday Night Live watching, NPR Whole Food shopping liberals. Like, and what do those people do? Like, these people in the 2000s were watching Hotel Rwanda in the theaters, and then they go to a dinner party and then say, "Hey, did you see Hotel Rwanda? Oh my God, I can't believe those people." And then that's it. And, that's
the shit.
Yeah, that's the shit. So that's why it's just easy to, when you say, Carl made a good point. He's like, you have problems in America you could be dealing with ICE and all this stuff. So why are you worried about this? But to them, they are dealing with ICE because earlier in the week they put a what was the thing about ICE, that hashtag that was going on? Like, earlier they tweeted ICE sucks. Then they tweeted hey, China sucks. To them, that's the equal amount of work that they did. So
that's the taboo part. T is like, if these tote bags will go and watch Hotel Rwanda, and then later the taboo thing is to admit that I don't really know what continent Rwanda is on or where the fuck it is, and I'm not sure whether it's the Hutu or the Tutsis that were getting killed. I don't know shit about what was going on, and frankly, I don't really care. I mean, I think that's the taboo thing you're not allowed to say that is actually probably true.
And a part of the way they don't care, how it gets shown that they don't care, is how they even do the research. Because, like, I'll give an example right now. There's a Woody Allen documentary going on, right? And this is not to defend Woody Allen at all, but whether you think Woody Allen's a creep or not, this documentary is just made by an interested group that wants to exonerate like Mia Farrow and get Woody Allen. Like, my thing is, Woody Allen is a scumbag and whatever, but Mia Farrow had all those kids die in her care, and a lot of weird stuff happened to only the non-white kids. The white kids were fine, all the Asian kids, So I'm like, I don't want to choose between Woody Allen and Mia Farrow. I think he's a scumbag, but I think she's really, and the Asian boy Moses Farrow, well, man now, but has said all this stuff, and I just see all these liberals / leftists who are basically just glorified liberals. They're like, oh, this thing shows once and for all Woody Allen is this and Mia Farrow is a victim. And it's like, did you do any research outside of this one clearly biased thing? Like, and this is again, I know someone's going to see this and say, oh, he's defending Woody Allen, which is, again, not what I'm doing. I just am not trying to cape for some woman who seems to have all her non-white kids get killed and nobody, or die or commit suicide. Nobody cares. I want nothing to do with her either. Yeah, and I think that's where we're at. Hotel Rwanda. Coney, remember Coney 2012? Oh
my! Actually, I had a friend say that this current situation reminds her a lot of Coney 2012. Where people who, you talked about this, like the sincerity poisoned types, who just want to look like they care about everything so much, but their public performance of caring actually ends up hurting people.
Yeah,
Because
their idea of raising awareness is raising awareness for the thing that confirms what they already believe, not actually learning about the thing. So whether it's, you know, whatever it is today, if it's Coney 2012, I already believe that's what Africans are, you know, or
right.
They get manipulated. I mean,
that believe that like all
need
Africans are warlords. Yeah.
I mean, Q, that need to care is exactly what makes it easy to manipulate these people.
Yeah.
You know, you throw the right label on
to
something, or say if you don't do this, then you're supporting genocide and whatever. So you'll do it.
You know what came to mind a second ago? Okay, you know how like people want to talk about how like racist the Chinese are to other people, and like how they're like colonizing Africa and that they're colonizing Tibet and so forth. And this is stuff that we really should care about, right? Remember when we discussed that movie Wolf Warriors Part 2 a little while back? And Carl's smiling because he wants to talk to me about this, right? Yeah,
kind of a fucked up movie, to be honest.
Right, exactly. The amount of like the just the blatant anti-black racism in that movie was just like, and the thing is, what was it about that movie that stood out? It was like how American it was in nature. You know what I mean? Like how much the movie was trying to be like a replicant of like American like gung ho war movies like Delta Force or some shit like that, right?
It's Rambo with Chinese character.
Didn't Urumqi say that specifically? He was like, "How come Chinese can't make an American style movie?" That was sort of the genesis of the Wolf Warrior series, right?
Yeah. So what I was trying to say was that like if people actually did care, because like I know that when you say stuff like I don't care, I know that you actually do care because we talk about this shit all the time. It's just a matter of like you're not willing to go out and A, like do the performance of caring in front of people, and B, like you understand that these people really do not care, right?
Right.
Yeah. You think confirmation bias is research and raising awareness?
So what I'm trying to say is that like, you know, if people actually had any interest in having like cultural conversations about what is happening in China, and me who does not speak the language, has never been there, like these are cues that even I can pick up on simply by like reading books and consuming popular culture. Is that like, okay, so there are some problems that we probably should talk about, right? But they're not interested in any of that. Like this stuff never comes up in conversation ever. It's only ever like the stuff that gets pushed in front of our faces, like the hysterical like news media releases, the blaring headlines, the genocide and all that. That's what we want to talk about. But where it comes to like the day-to-day things that actually do affect people, complete crickets, silence, because nobody's interested in that stuff.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, totally makes sense. Real quick, you said Wolf Warrior, and it reminded me of this thing that his Biden CIA pick said. You know, he said that China conducts quote Wolf Warrior diplomacy.
Oh, that's taken from that movie. Yeah, it's a direct lift from
no way, he didn't say that. That's wild.
Yeah, and he vows to focus on a rising China. When you said Wolf Warrior, I remember, where did I hear? Because I didn't know what Wolf Warrior was until you just said it, and I'm like, I know I heard that phrase. I'm like, oh, that's where I heard it. It was.
Okay.
It was that guy. So check this guy out. Biden CIA pick vows to focus. So this bodes great. Aren't you glad you have a Democrat in charge now? You know, it's always great when the bombs have a D on them. You know, so. Biden CIA pick vows to focus on a rising China. Countering China, quote, is the biggest geopolitical test that we face. The veteran diplomat told senators, the biggest geopolitical test that we face. I want to find the Wolf Warrior thing. I find that funny. Yeah.
Less people. Oh, sorry, good.
Go ahead. No, I can say the sentence real quick. He called the evolution of Chinese President Xi Jinping over the last several years, quote, a very sharp wake-up call, unquote, adding Beijing's, quote, aggressive undisguised ambition and assertiveness has made clear the nature of Chinese intentions. Still, Burns said, China's, quote, wolf warrior diplomacy has opened the eyes of allies and partners about the nature of the threat posed by the communist government. And someone in the chat said, I don't know if this is true, that one of the reasons they hate him so much is because he's done a lot to eject the CIA out of China. I don't know.
Article about how CIA.
Oh, that was Mao's guy. What was his name again? Mao's like right hand dude. Like practically weeded the CIA out of China, and it's gonna come back to me.
Hold on, but Carl was saying something. I want to give him a chance.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would just mention that there was an article about how CIA lost their assets in China, in the last few years. But they always posture as like she is like the Hitler of the 2021, right? And what they try to shift focus on is the China-U.S. relationship. The tension was driven by the U.S. side. It started from Obama year. It started from when Hillary Clinton was a Secretary of State, when she proposed a pivot to Asia. I mean, this is a woman who around that time said the Pacific Ocean should be American lake. She was on record of saying Pacific Ocean is our lake. This is a woman who we know fucked up in Libya and Syria, but she also the whole pivot to Asia is not economic, it's not culture, it's military. It's a military pivot to Asia to put more hardware asset of US closer to Chinese coast. When all the problem started to happening. Sorry, go ahead, G.
But I'm not gonna let you get away with not mentioning this. They're making a maniacal drive to create a master race of superhuman Chinese.
Oh yeah.
So it makes sense.
What
else can they do? What else can they do, Carl, except build up the military? Because look what's happening.
Actually, there's a well-known joke on Chinese social media that Gordon Chang is actually a secret agent of the Chinese Communist Party. He's a Chinese Mo who got implanted in US to sow disinfo. That's why he was so consistent in the past 20 years, never wavering.
I'm sorry, but
it's a classic example of like the US accusing China of doing something that the US has done before, because the US has definitely studied ways to biologically enhance soldiers.
Oh, actually, Amanda has a couple of these. Hold on, look at this. I didn't realize this was a constant trope. There's China. Oh, Gordon Chang again. China's creating a new master race.
Oh, he's got more than that. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Wow.
Yeah. That's pretty funny. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, saying that he's got some of the like wildest tweets I've ever seen. Like he said a while back that that China was like going to group punish the Uyghur people with coronavirus. So hang on, I'll have to pull up the tweet and see if I can get it into your chat, or maybe send it to you on Discord.
Oh, I have it. Don't worry.
Okay. Russian severe sanctions we placed on China now. How many crimes against humanity must be committed before we do something? And that was a quote tweet of this like right-wing ideologue saying that there's reports that they're taking Uyghurs to do forced labor in factories like outside of Xinjiang, and that they contract coronavirus and are sent back to infect their own communities.
CJ Werman. Okay, he's the guy.
Yeah. No. This was Matthew Van Dyke. This wasn't.
Oh, it's a different one. Okay. Oh, so there's multiple people saying China.
Explain that the number of Uyghur victims have passed the Holocaust. This is your man. See, I mean, he's a trip.
Carl, maybe this is a good opportunity. I mean, to press you a little bit. Like, let's talk about China and Africa. I mean, I think it's a valid discussion to worry about China's intentions in Africa. And I think that there can be constructive criticism as to what assurances China has as a better actor than any other non-African state that investing capital into China.
Before we go, just based on our own impressions, I would recommend China in Africa podcast, which is run by an American journalist, Eric Olander. He actually interviews Africans, African journalists from within Africa to talk about this China-Africa relationship. I actually learned a lot through that podcast. So what I want to say is, we should listen to more African voices, rather than U.S. State Department, rather than Pompeo have to say about China and Africa. I actually read a New York Times, a former New York Times journalist, Howard French's book on China, Africa. I think his book is called China's Next Continent. Basically, his book cover is African continent with the Chinese flag slap on it.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I read the book, because I wanted to understand what is the criticism of China African policy, and I wanted to understand from a perspective of New York Times journalist, what is the worst China is being accused of. After I read it, my impression is, well, that's not too bad. I mean, is this the worst that China is being accused of? I mean, this doesn't seem too bad. First of all, the narrative, the frame is that China is a neo-imperialist, neo-colonialist power in Africa. I mean, okay, all the China-Africa dealings right now, they are being conducted through bilateral relationship, being agreed both by the Chinese and the African governments. I think we can have a valid argument about whether those African governments actively represent the people of their countries, but this is a deal between sovereign countries, right? I mean, China is not selling its gunboats to Africa to hold its gun to the African leaders, say, hey, take the Chinese loans, or else, right? That's the that's a European experience in Africa. What we have in Africa is whether those it's wise for those African leaders to take on these Chinese loans who may not be repayable, right? That is the real discussion that people should be having, not whether China is replicating what the Belgian Congo, right? I mean, China is not going there to chop off people's arms and legs for not meeting the ivory quota, right?
Yeah, I mean, Carl, I'm making the point, I guess, that lest people think that pushing back against bullshit claims about genocide in Xinjiang means you're some kind of puppet of the Chinese Communist Party or an online Umao or whatever. It's kind of bullshit. I think there are valid ways to criticize or scrutinize the Chinese government and what it's doing without having to cave to every bullshit thing that's said about it.
Yeah, I mean, like right now, I mean, if people who follow me a long time know, I used to criticize Chinese government all the time, especially on the censorship issue, because I have been the target of the Chinese censorship on Chinese social media. I had a Weibo account with 5 million followers. It was banned, it was suspended, and so I had been constantly talking about it. But right now, there's just a flood of anti-China articles in Western media, obviously pushed by all these national security sectors, right? With obvious aim of creating tensions in China. So now just so happens most of my time is devoted to debunking these ridiculous claims. It doesn't mean I'm 100% on board with what Chinese government is doing. It's just now I think that the focus, I asked about what your guest opinion around Chinese foreign policy in Africa. Yes, I mean, people are saying, yeah, China is obviously in Africa for its own benefit. Of course, just like any other nations, right? They pursue their own national interests. And we probably should take Chinese government's official line is a win-win policy with a grain of salt, because there's a big power differential, because in bilateral relationship between China and Africa, the African countries, it's just because it's comparatively much smaller in size, it doesn't have the same negotiation power.
Well, and also they're the debtor nation in these bilateral on these bilateral agreements, right? China's the creditor.
I mean, there's talks among African nations about forming like a kind of trade bloc so they can negotiate together with China, but that's something for the African governments to figure out. Like these are talking points that we can discuss, but right now, like the talk that China is an imperialist power in Africa, I think that's just ridiculous.
I don't know. Well, I think, I mean, I'm actually, I mean, just to go back to that question, because I think that's a good question. I think that scrutiny is good here, because although China isn't at the sort of stage of the U.S. in terms of exporting its capital and engaging in debt trap diplomacy and things like that, I mean, China is exporting capital and incurring debts, particularly debts denominated in its own currency in Africa. And I have seen, frankly, that signs. For example, go watch Wolf Warrior 2, and I've seen things on Chinese television that make me pause as to whether Chinese are following in the colonialist mindset of Europeans before them in terms of their attitudes towards Africa. I've seen it. You see it in Wolf Warrior 2. And I saw in programs like, and I'm not saying that that's what China's doing. I'm just saying that it is worth scrutinizing.
I will reiterate my recommendation for China in Africa podcast, which is hosted by a white American podcaster who actually invites a lot of African guests to come to his show to talk about this very new, interesting relationship. To give you a true African perspective, rather than what we've been fed in mainstream media about, what China is doing in Africa. I highly recommend people to go.
Oh no, but I'm talking about what's being fed in Chinese media is not always from what I've seen.
Right. I mean,
very promising.
Racism does exist in China, unlike a contrary claim. But I think the Chinese racism is a little bit different from the American racism. A lot of Chinese racism stems from ignorance. There's a lot of ignorance in China and lack of self-awareness, I would say. That's why we end up having that stupid black-facing skit in Chinese Spring Festival Gala, right? I mean, like who would think that's a great idea? Anybody who had experience living in the West would be able to tell them that's a stupid idea. Don't do that, right? But that's because it's from ignorance. It's because they didn't stage that show to mock Africans. They staged the show was actually about how the cooperation and friendship between China and Africa, but totally bombed because the producers don't even understand how it's perceived by other people. That's a problem with the Chinese state media. They fucking do not understand their audience. They don't even understand what they're trying to sell to other. I mean, it's one of my frustration with the Chinese media. Okay, by the way,
yeah.
And these people are so lack of self-awareness that they don't know how the outside world perceive China.
I kind of feel that way. And I hate to cut you off, but I think you're kind of touching on something. It's just like the way that I think there's just a couple things. One is a kind of a paternalism, right?
Yes.
In the sense that our relationship with Africans is a beneficial one because X, Y, and Z. But it's like, yeah, but what about what they want? You know what I mean? Like, just because African states have been exploited by the West previously doesn't mean that any other option is a good option. I think there's the lack of willingness to look at that. And then the second thing is, I've kind of seen this with on social media when people will post in response to people talking about how terribly Uyghur people are treated. They'll show festivals and people dancing and all the festive colors and the clothes and all that, and it's that's not a whole lot different than saying that there's racism happening in America and then somebody posting I don't know, pictures of Soul Train or some shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Showing people smiling and dancing doesn't mean that everything's all peachy keen.
Yeah.
And and then the second one was that tweet. I forget which account it was, but I know that it was. I think it was the Chinese embassy to the U.S. that tweeted that well, thanks to these educational initiatives, Uyghur women are no longer baby making factories, and I'm dog, come on. Sorry, it seems like you're muted, Carl. Yeah.
Carl, you might be muted.
I think
Carl's spitting right now, but he's muted.
Unmute him. Hold on, I unmuted him.
There we go. Yeah.
I wish all the claims of me being the chief Chinese propagandist is true, so I can fire the entire Chinese state media team and build it from bottom up, because like they're just so inept and so terrible. Like the people, like I don't understand how these people get their jobs. You know, maybe their cousin or their auntie works in the government, but they don't understand. They don't understand their audience. They don't. So they say these incredibly idiotic things on the internet, like Q said, very paternalistic. Like they are. Yeah, it's like. Yeah, I can go on for hours talking about how Chinese state media is crap. I do agree. You know, there's some kind of because China is even though it's multi-ethnic nation, but you know over 92% is a Han majority. So there's kind of the people, the kind of the majority thinking, right? And like when they look, they're not thinking from. They're not thinking from the perspective of the people they are speaking to. Rather, they're speaking from their own perspective, which is not, which is
it's like cultural chauvinism showing out, right? And that's a problem that you're going to run into just about anywhere. And it's just that like the only issue is that, you know, there's one country that seems to be in everybody's crosshairs, and it's like you can't let the cultural chauvinism just leak out at the same time that we're having this kind of a conversation. It's not helping.
Exactly.
I don't want to go on too much longer because I feel like we've gone a good amount of time, but I want to make sure we didn't leave anything out that anybody might think is important to say, you know. So I have two just notes I made of things that I didn't really understand that I was hoping you guys could explain. What is the Han supremacy talking point? Like, you touched on it in various places when you gave the history, and it's come up several times, like Han this and Han and this Han narrative, but the general concept of the Han supremacy talking point, I'm very curious about.
So basically, you take the talking points about white supremacy in US and you project it to China, because Han Chinese is a majority ethnic group in China, make up 92%. So because white supremacy exists in United States, that means there's Han supremacy in China. That's there's a lot of projection in there. It doesn't mean there's not chauvinistic attitude among the Han majority. It doesn't mean that, but to compare, people think what happened in US must happen in China also. That's why we hear how China is a Han supremacist state. But go ahead. But I will shut up now.
People even do that domestically, like when they make black men into the white people, the black people.
Well,
so
I think what happened with the Han supremacy, which I think, Carl, that seems like it's relatively new in the lexicon. I've not seen that until recently.
I was called a Han supremacist by Matt Schrader circa 2018, I think.
Yeah.
2018. Because I laugh at his Chinese skills. So he called me.
I think Han supremacy is an abandonment of we love the Chinese people but hate the government. After Tiananmen Square, I think the idea was that the Chinese people were reformable and assimilable into the international American system, but the communists had to go. And if you saw the Chinese people, the Han Chinese-looking people, right, rising up against their government, that you could say, oh, I love the Chinese people because they're useful for us because they're going to stand up against the communists. Now, after it's pretty clear that the Chinese population has pretty unwavering support for their government, I think they've abandoned that and said, oh shit, we've got to see them all as enemies now, Han supremacists. Yeah. And then they've got to go and start finding other forms of internal dissent in China to back.
There's always something like slightly racist about that phrase, love the people, hate the government, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And paternalistic, yeah.
And paternalistic, because I mean, first of all, there's like very strong support for the CPC within China. And second of all, there's always this like white savior complex that goes along with it. I don't know.
Well, I got ate up because I said like I don't really care anything for the government. I just like I care about people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got ate up for that, and I was like, oh, I probably sound just like one of the people, but it's really just like what I'm trying to say is that like I don't have any particular loyalty to any party, whatever. But from my vantage point, if so many people support, like if the government has such high support of the people, I'm like, well, then like who am I to tell people otherwise? You know what I mean? If that's what they want, if you like it, love it.
It's always phrased that like the people in the government in China are diametrically opposed.
Which
they're not. There is high support, and it's not that like Chinese people don't have criticisms of the party. They do, but you know, unlike like the CPC actually delivers. You know, whereas here, you know, we can vote. I think it was Eric Lee who said in a one of his interviews or something. You know, we can vote for different parties here, but like fundamentally nothing ever changes. Policy never really ever changes. In China, you can't really change the party, but you can change policy.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to go back a little bit to the Han supremacy argument. It got so pervasive to the point where anybody who is against the criticism of China is being accused of Han supremacists. There's a Australian Chinese guy. He goes by the handle Steel Muslim on Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
He's being accused of being a Han supremacist, but this guy is literally a Hui Chinese.
I was going to say, isn't he Hui? Yeah, because I've spoken to him over DMs. Yeah,
but like he was being called a Han supremacist, and by one of the ASPI analysts, Nathan Rooster, who analyzed look at all the satellite images in Google to decide which one are concentration camp. So when he pushed back against it, he's like, I'm not even Han Chinese. Why you call? And then just what Nathan Rooster said next is like, well, Hui are basically Han who converted to Islam. So you're just basically Han Muslim. So you're still Han. It's like, shit, man. You are now deciding who is what. It's
so weird because that happened. There's so many parallels across different races and religions and whatever of that type of argument where it's like, okay, you're functionally an agent of this. So we're going to treat you as the same thing. That's hilarious. Was someone gonna say something? I heard someone's voice popping in. Was that UQ or was that? Did I imagine?
No, it wasn't me.
Okay,
I was just laughing. Yeah.
Okay. You know, this thing is interesting here. The person says the Chinese did not help themselves in Africa by dealing with the governments only because those corrupt governments embezzled the funds and didn't do anything for their people. But I think a tricky thing about that is what else could they do? Because
like who you wanted to deal with, yeah,
because if they skipped over the government in the name of we decided we're going to help the people, then they look like interventionists who, you know, like what the CIA does, which is, hey, what we're doing is helping the people, you know, against a corrupt government. So I think, I mean, this might be true that the government might be corrupt in some of these African regions. I don't know enough about the geopolitics, but I think encouraging them to skip over the government and in the name of the people is, even if you end up liking it in this case, I'm not sure if that's a good policy to encourage.
I think it also really depends on which government you're talking about. Like there are different governments that have different relationships, right? Like like Tanzania and Zambia are going to have a different relationship than Nigeria and Ghana have, you know. And I think personally, I think even though like Zambians would probably, it depends on, I guess, who you talk to. Like some of them would say that China is exploiting us, and others would say, well, the West was exploiting us for much longer, and you know, like China's actually giving us debt forgiveness. I would say you really have to talk to actual people in those countries to get their sense of how they feel about, like, I know that for example, like people would point out the 99-year fishing lease in Somalia And at first, when I saw that, I was like, "Holy shit, that seems like that's pretty bad." But then I talked to Somalis like in Somalia, and they say, "No, I mean it seems like that way, but like the Italians and the Dutch and other people would just come and fish in our waters without our permission anyway. So at least if we have an agreement with China and they're building us like schools and hospitals, etc., we're getting something out of it. Versus these other countries would just come and fish in our waters and not pay us anything at all." Right. So I think it really, yeah.
And also, Chinese foreign policy is they will deal with whoever is legitimate government, no matter what form. So I mean, there are different forms of government in Africa. In Kenya, Kenya is a democracy, right? They have elections versus other African countries, which I will not name. I mean, it's really depending. The owner. I think we are kind of we're kind of denying African people the agency here, right? I mean, it's up to the Africans to form their own government, to shape their own government institutions. But I think Chinese state companies are doing better nowadays. They're now learning from the Western companies to do community overreach, right? Because there are instances in the back. There are instances where, say, PetroChina in the past, they form a agreement with the African government to drill oil in certain parts, but they didn't. But there's opposition from the local communities, right? But now
because they weren't hiring local workers.
Yeah. So now I think they're learning. This is very new from China to go doing business abroad. So there's a steep learning curve. So I think now they're learning to have more of these local community reach programs, to do more consultations with people on the ground. And I mean, it's not to say there's not drawbacks. I agree. I agree with this. A criticism that yes, what about the cases where the government is corrupt and do not represent the local people interest? But then again, it's really up to the Africans to work on their institutions, to work on their governance, right? I mean, like for the Chinese government, I mean, what's there to do but to deal with a legitimate government?
Yeah, I don't know if Queen asking that question is Peter's bum or solidarity with Aid on Twitter or not, but big fan of that account if it is.
Oh wait, you don't know if Queen is who?
At Peter's bum on Twitter, or I think her handle is solidarity with Aid. I'm not sure if that's who it is, but if so, I like that account a lot.
Oh, if that's her, that would be great, because I've seen. I know the account you're talking about, but Queen is cool people, because she always says nice things, and I'm very easy. If you say nice things about me, it doesn't take much.
I saw a comment says they don't have to skip over. They can invest things in people will buy into exchange program, education, training people, and not import all labor from China. I think that is actually happening right now. I mean, it's I don't know what the pace of change is, but the current practice of Chinese state-owned enterprise in Africa is different from they were 10 years back, and I think a lot of the pushback was useful to inform them how to do better businesses with China in Africa.
Yeah, and I think you used the word. I mean, I think you meant the word outreach. You said overreach, which is actually a bad thing. But I think you meant outreach. But
yes,
outreach, I think this is an example of outreach, right? Where what she's proposing, and you're saying that they've been moving a little bit closer in that direction.
Yeah.
Okay. No, the only reason I want to point that out is because I know some people always take things literally. They're gonna be like, "Why did your guest say overreach?" Yeah. So.
Yeah. Again, I recommend people to go listen to that China in Africa podcast run by Eric Olander. It's really good. English language resource about China and African interactions.
I have one last funny tweet to show, then I'll let you guys end it with whatever you want. But, well, not funny, but disturbing funny. Tom Cotton had a new report, Beat China, Targeted Decoupling and the Economic Long War. And he called again for banning all Chinese grad students. I don't know how that's even constitutional, but banning all Chinese grad students from studying certain STEM subjects, saying it's, quote, often impossible to distinguish honest students from spies. And remember that State Department report said how America dealt with its racism in the 50s, and only China still has it. And this is something that just came out this week. He encourages having Chinese students study subjects like humanities, which could foster, quote, skepticism of Communist Party rule. And it says that U.S. government should ensure that all Chinese students who remain in America can carry their studies free of CCP intimidation and surveillance.
Carl, you think Tom Cotton is a Chinese communist plant? Because he sounds like one.
He's a deep no. I mean, this is also a reaction to what Amanda said earlier. It's I think there's a shock among the American elite that the Chinese students are coming over, especially after 2000s. More of them turn out to be vocal supporters of the Chinese government policy. And of course, the only reason is because they're so brainwashed.
He's speaking truth. The dog's acting up. You can't tell us the truth.
He starts spitting the dog. The dog starts acting up too. Yeah.
Hey, stop clap. Sorry. Let me mute my mic.
You're giving the game away. I'm sorry. Go on.
I think he muted himself.
Oh, there we go. No, I think he muted himself so he can yell at the dog. So it's okay.
Okay.
It's deliberate.
Yeah. Sorry. I just muting myself so you guys can talk without interrupting our dog in the background.
No, it's fine. If you're okay to talk now, you can continue.
I lost my train of thought. So
regarding Africa, I mean, I feel like it's got to be admitted that all of these interactions are taking place within a capitalist framework, and there is no sense, at least as far as I can tell, there's no sense that the Chinese are somehow just plainly benevolent. I don't think you've said that, but they're not benevolent actors. These are business transactions. And so long as you're in that frame, I feel like it's better probably to have more competitors. It's better to have it can't just be the IMF in there, right? It's got to be, or the World Bank. It's got to be multiple market participants within the capitalist frame competing with each other. And the IMF was turning into a monopolist, and that's not a good way to conduct that. But
going back to what Q said earlier, right? It's like why do the African governments take up all these Chinese loans? What other choice, what other options, right? Like the American companies are not going in there to invest in Africa right now. United States State Department even tried to get American businesses to get more involved to invest in Africa. That hasn't yield fruit. The American multinationals, the ones that are there are the oil companies, oil company and mining companies. They're in the extraction industry. Other than that, the rest of them are not interested in to go to Africa to invest in roads and building ports. It's only, so where is African governments going to get their loans from? I mean, right now, China is not going to Africa for a purely altruistic reason. It's going there to get the African resources, but at least they're not imposing their will on the Africans to forcibly grab those resources. It's a trade going on. You can argue about whether that trading partnership is equal because China has such a big market and has more capital. I mean that's a good talking points. But then right now I think, as you said, more competition is good. China is just giving more competition to IMF and World Bank. Yeah,
I think what you who would be a really good person to talk to is there's a policy analyst by the name of Ovigwe Egwegu. He works for Development Reimagined, which does specialize in China-Africa relations, and he has some pretty, I think, good and nuanced perspectives on these ideas. He's critical, but he's also working from within the African continent, from within Nigeria, and he has, I think, a fairly good and balanced perspective on all this.
Yeah, I say I agree. Just listen to Africans. Listen to African voices.
You gotta be careful because it might be like a girl trying to say listen to Chinese voices that she finds
Only
the right one.
Only the Gordon Chen is a credible Chinese voice.
Yeah, they might be find the Gordon Chang of Africa. You know,
hey, Gordon Chang will probably put on blackface if there's money for it. So
there's a chance to bash.
You know, why
see
is
that.
Gordon Chang a Korean expert? I never understood that. He was being shown on MSNBC, CNN, and quoted as an expert on North Korea. The dude is not even Korean. I mean, he's half Chinese. He's not Korean.
close enough, man.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Anyways.
Any final thoughts that people wanted to bring up that they felt they didn't get a chance to before we end it? Or if you just want to plug where to find you, you know, whether on Twitter or elsewhere, by all means, this is a chance to do it.
My final thought is stop coming after me on Twitter. It's not going to end well. That's it.
Yeah, but someone who doesn't have a lot of time, you're taking some time to really beat some people down. I'm impressed because you're a pretty productive guy. You're not someone who just sits home and, you know, tweets all day. Give people
That's me. I shitpost all day. After my surgery, I come back, I just shitpost. And people can read my shitposting at Carl Za on Twitter. It's one word. Yeah. Carl spelled with a C, and my last name ZHA. Yeah. So and also I run a podcast, Silk and Steel podcast, which is focused on China, history, culture, politics. You can find me on Patreon. Please support me. It's my main source of income right now to support me to continue to surf and shitpost on Twitter. Thank you, guys.
I'm Amanda. I don't have anything to plug, but you can follow me on Twitter at Cat Content Only. You can yell at me if you want, but honestly, I don't have the patience to like yell back at you. So
yeah, I feel like it's worse for you, and I have to assume it's for gendered reasons because I think people work out their weird psychosexual racial stuff on you mixed in with
that's
the
why
usual...
I had to close my DMs. I can no longer have open DMs because people it was like DMs that were just like weirdly sexual, or they would just send me like a message that said something like Tiananmen 1989 or something like that, and that was it.
Wow. Very similar to AOC, where like the right wingers, you know, don't know if they're like sexually fixated on her, if they hate her. It's like, you know, it's like I hate her. I hate AOC with her brown skin and her communist views and her silky hair and her
hot takes.
Yeah, and her welfare state. It's like, wait, what do you? I don't know what's going on. It's very
what do you
weird.
mad at exactly? Yeah.
Are you mad or turned
that's gonna
on?
be it because Amanda, I'll retweet or have similar tweets as you, and nobody jumps in my DMs about shit. So
yeah, I got my first hate mail this week, Amanda. You know, somebody finally tracked down my email and just sent me a hate mail. I was like, oh man, I can't imagine what Amanda gets flooded daily.
She posts them sometimes.
Yeah, but
it's pretty horrifying.
To my detractors, it's like, feel free to find me face to face. You know, if you have problem with me, we can deal with me face to face. You know, if you want to, I'm in Bali. You know, come anytime.
T, are you in a rush to wrap this up because it's 11:40 p.m. and you guys have about only 4 more hours left in the day before you go to sleep?
I mean, I'm just gonna eat some food basically. But I mean, I could.
Y'all are so you guys are so active in the demon hours, I think is what Q calls them.
Yeah. Well,
2 a.m.
you know, it's weird. I'm a big napper, so I just like because working at home, I just like sneak in naps and stuff. So with this COVID, my schedule is all like weird. I don't really sleep 8 hours anymore. I sleep 8 hours, but it's not like consecutive like it used to be. Yeah, it's whatever. Oh, Gene, did you get a chance to replug?
You could find me on podcast Escape from Plan A.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm sure some craziness is going to happen again the next year that will probably bring us together again. But let's see. Actually, next week. Forget next year. So thanks everyone for joining us. Don't forget to support the show at patreon.com/Champagne Sharks, and just do the quick house cleaning. You can Venmo or Cash App us at Champagne Sharks, PayPal, champagnesharks@gmail.com. Or yeah, I mean, I think that's basically it. Or just hit the super chat. Can get nice stuff like extra mics and all the other kind of and ring lights and all the other kind of stuff we reinvest back in the show, or just help me pay off my student loans because they're a bitch. And that's it. Everybody, be good. Take care. Have a good one.
Peace.